our Republic of Letters Groundbreak 2020 conference. People are still joining us in, and we are waiting for our keynote speaker to join us momentarily. So if I could ask you to wait for 5 minutes, and we'll keep you updated. Please don't go away. We are just about to start in a few minutes. Thank you so much. Good afternoon again. I'm really sorry, but we had a bit of a technical glitch and Professor Sahasrabuddhe was here, but we had got him in the audience area and now we've got him in as a panelist. I'm really sorry, sir, about that. I want to not waste any more time and welcome Dr. Anil Sahasrabuddhe to the second day of our conference. This is the second day of the Republic of Letters conference. Yesterday, we had almost 1,300 people who joined us from across India. We are very excited today to have three outstanding keynote speakers. The first one of which is Dr. Anil Sahasrabuddhe. Dr. Sahasrabuddhe is the chairman of the All India Council for Technical Education. And his keynote address is entitled Technical Education Reimagined. This session is moderated by Vineet Gupta, who's a founder and trustee of Ashoka University. Vineet, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce Dr. Sahasrabuddhe, and then we'll hand it over to Dr. Sahasrabuddhe.
Thank you, Pramath, and it's my real honor and pleasure to welcome Dr. Anil Sahasrabuddhe to this conference, who's been the former director of the College of Engineering at Pune. He has a master's and a PhD from the Indian Institute of Science and a bachelor's degree from Karnataka University, where he's also been a gold medalist. He's also been a faculty at IIT Guwahati for 11 years. But, you know, I would really like to describe him as a reformer, as a friend of technical education, and as a great leader. I think he has brought in much needed reform to the All India Council for Technical Education. You know, he's somebody whom we all look up to. He's somebody whom we all can go to and discuss ideas freely. So, Professor Sahasrabuddhe, really an honor and pleasure to welcome you. And over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Vineet Gupta ji. My friend Pramath Raj Sinha, Ashoka University has been doing splendid job in terms of engaging people during COVID times. And this Republic of Letters was very impressive because the name itself has a lot of things which carries the message. And today we are talking about future of technical education, its reimagination. And there are three sessions. I saw the mail. One is on transition to digital mode, resilient institution, and leading from the front. I think three subtopics and three different panel discussions would operate later. And each one of those panelists are also my good friends and very impressive one. I would be loving to even attend them and listen to whatever thoughts they have so that we can implement them in our technical education. But given the background, this COVID-19 has come as a shocker to everyone, the entire world. Nations which are underdeveloped to the most developed, everyone was hit. And as though we say that level playing field, whether it is from a rich country or a poor country, a rich city or a poor city, I think everyone is affected. And therefore, taking care of this during this crucial time was very, very difficult for all of us. Some of these universities and colleges who had wherewithal in terms of technology, infrastructure, they could transform quickly and continued their classes in online mode, including some of them conducted their examinations online, and whereas others who were crippled actually. So I always gave example recently of that of fluid mechanics, in which we have laminar layer, we have a boundary layer, and then there is a turbulent phase. And some of them fall into each one of these three categories. But anyway, post-COVID, we are all required to be completely engaged in a new way of education in particular, and then technical education more importantly. And for that, these three topics are very, very relevant. Transition to digital. I think we have no other choice but to slowly transform ourselves into digital mode of education, at least if not fully, to a great extent. And that is what is the need of the hour. So possibly we have a mode of what is known as blended learning, hybrid learning, or mixed mode, or we may name it by anything, even flipped classroom. So the essence was all of this had somehow started a couple of years back in some form or the other, including MHRD when directed, and we had this Swayam platform created, which is nothing but a massive online open courses platform, which was developed completely indigenously with 2,500 plus courses and as many as 1 crore plus registered users. Even not only Indians, but 112 odd countries using it. And this is all in operation for last 3 years, as though this was likely, thing where we will have to be strengthening. We were knowing it, and that COVID will come someday, and therefore we were doing, I don't know, but we had already started in a big way. Not only that, 20% of the credits were allowed to be taken by students into their respective curricula, and then carry them into their respective transcripts. I think this is a big reform. Some of them are giving certainly online degrees, but major universities and colleges in the world over, they don't have a model where 30%, 20% of the credits can be taken through this mode. So we have had this for quite some time, and during this period, we have even thought of increasing to 40%. So that means transition to digital is real, and that's going to happen. And then many a times we talk about augmented reality, virtual reality, and this is where we come to whether the real world is that or real world is this, is a question which we have been asking ourselves quite often. And last but not the least, for the transition and for being resilient, one of the important things all institutions need to do is risk assessment and risk management. In industry, there is a very clear strategy that every industry, they have their own risk assessment and how do they need to do risk management. When it comes to the government, of course, in terms of foreign relations, there's a lot of risk assessment and risk management that the governments of the day do. When it comes to the politicians and political parties, they do a lot of risk assessment and management. But when it comes to normal governance in most of the countries, and in more so in our country, whether it is agriculture, whether it is healthcare, and more important, education, we have never done any risk assessment and management. And that's why when such situation arises, we are suddenly taken aback and we do not know what to do. And with this being there, so naturally, an institution which is resilient is very, very important. How flexibly we can transform one domain to the other domain, how we can immediately change over. The thing that is not only in terms of availability of technology, training, but also attitude. And attitude wise also, it's very, very important that we need to do it. Who have been able to do it? Again, the third panel discussion talks about leading from the front. And I think this is where leaders of educational institutions, whether they are vice chancellors, directors, principals, I think they have to take the leading role and engage faculty in order to continue with the crisis. Despite whenever opening up happens, and whether it is lockdown will be over in 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, no one knows. So therefore, as and when it starts, I think our technical education had to be completely reimagined, and we have to set in place few things which are very necessary and important. Starting with infrastructure. There are institutions where the internal infrastructure in terms of Wi-Fi connectivity and good bandwidth, internet connectivity, etc., is already available. Those who do not have, their first priority must be to inculcate the infrastructure development in terms of IT infrastructure. From the government side, the college and university may have all this. They may start continuing the education partly through online mode, but whether recipient, that the student is able to take it is an important question. And therefore, like our building of roads, electricity to all villages, we have roads to all villages, we have railway connectivity, we have aircraft and airport connectivity. So I think similar to that, how do we take internet? BharatNet is already being in operation. We had an ARNet facility earlier. Now we talk about BharatNet. Can we take it to all nooks and corners? That is what is the most important thing. Every village must be connected with internet, and as much as possible to every hamlet, every home. If we are able to do that, truly digital transformation is then likely to be possible. Still, another question which is often raised is that of the connectivity may be possible from the government side by taking the route, or even mobile smartphones, or you can certainly have all kind of connectivity. But do we have that kind of data available at that point in time where students can buy that and then make use of it? Number one. Do they have, first of all, devices themselves? Do they have either a PC, laptop, or a for example, smartphone? So these are the things which often are asked about, and this will create digital divide, is what is often talked about. Therefore, in order to empower our entire population and take care of the last person in the remotest possible village, I think certain things like, as I said, government should do internet connectivity to every nook and corner, but how people from the middle class and higher middle class who have enough mobile smart devices at their homes lying idle, because whenever new product comes, many times we buy a new one and the old one is lying idle here and there. If you throw it, it is an electronic waste which will create environmental hazard. On the other hand, if it is in good condition as it is, or if required to fix it a little bit, doing that, if we are able to donate it to the libraries of the institutions, and like books are distributed, why not give such mobile internet capable devices to our students so that they are empowered? Not only that, I had a meeting with NASSCOM, the NASSCOM's quarterly meeting, and when this agenda was raised, then they said that every year more than 500,000 computers and laptops are completely changed in the IT industry. Why can't they donate them? I think there are several possibilities of overcoming digital divide. Top 20% taking care of the bottom 20% who cannot afford at all, and the remaining, say, 60% buying off their own. And if somewhere something is required to be provided as a loan, I think all of that can be possible to create an infrastructure which is possible to empower all these people. When institutions start off, this physical distancing will continue to be there. We can't avoid it for at least next 6 months to a year. And therefore, the other models of the flipped classroom or the blended classroom, which we talked about maybe in a different form, that how in every course, 1/3 students actually come to the classroom and the remaining 2/3 will take the classes from their homes or the hostels. And that way, the physical distancing norm can be maintained. Same can be in the case of examinations. You can have a multiple question bank where you can have different difficulty levels. Same difficulty level question will come in the beginning 1/3 time, remaining 1/3 time moderately difficult questions, and last 1/3 will be difficult questions. If you have a huge data bank, we can conduct the examination every time for 1/3 of the students, and thereby it is something similar to how GRE, SAT, they conduct round the year examination. We can also think about that area also. We have a lot of OER resources which are available. SWAYAM is already there internally itself. How we can make students to start engaging in this and build capacity of the teachers in order to create new courses. And that is important. We have enough courses as far as probably engineering is concerned in the basic domain, but high-end courses, whether courses in AI, IoT, machine learning, deep learning, robotics, 3D printing, blockchain. I think so many other areas where we have already allowed institutions to offer minor degrees. Major in mechanical engineering with minor in AI, or major in computer science and minor in robotics. I think these kind of variations being allowed. We need a lot of courses because we don't have enough trained teachers as well. So one side, teacher training program in big way, which we have already started under Atal Academies, AICT's training and learning academies, which we have established. Last year in the face-to-face mode, 85 such courses were held, and in which 9,600 faculty were trained. But when the lockdown started, we were not able to do it face-to-face, and we had a target of about 500 this time from 200 last year. And we had to suddenly stop all this activity. So we innovated and said that we'll do it, all of them, in various modes, whether it is using Zoom, sometimes using Microsoft Teams, sometimes using Google Classroom, sometimes using WebEx. I think we have been able to conduct more than 85 programs. And in this 85 programs, vis-a-vis 185 programs last year, this year we were having as many as 18,000 teachers trained, because we can take 250, 300 faculty instead of 50 to 60 faculty in most of the workshops in the face-to-face mode. So in one side, the efficiency may be a little lower, quality may be also a little bit less compared to the face-to-face mode, but the volume which we are able to undertake is phenomenal. And therefore, I think capacity building of teachers through workshops in different domains is an important activity we should continue. Then all variety of platforms. For all meetings, we are already using all these platforms. Today itself, there were some hiccups actually. I don't know what happened. I opened it 3 times, but I was not able to get connected. And I connected, I was able to see Pratham, but he was not able to see me. So I think these are sometimes some technology challenges. Nevertheless, we have been using Zoom quite effectively. And these platforms, how faculty can really start making use of them, both for normal classroom teaching or even for offering internship, for offering projects. I think new way of looking at the entire technology that is available to us in different ways is what is very, very important. Many people also doubt about the examinations and how they can be conducted whenever it is not just objective type examination paper, but when there is subjective type. There are many people who have innovated. There are also proctored examinations possible using the camera of the laptop or the computer itself. And in fact, that is more stricter than the invigilator. Invigilator possibly will not be able to see all the 60 students in one go, but individual camera watching a student, whether his any activity is, leading to unfair means, can be tested, and the examination can stop. Actually, such possibilities exist using the AI techniques, using the image processing. I think all of these are possibilities, and therefore we should not be worried too much about all of those. Then when it comes to 2 other important things which often we talk about is internships, which we have made mandatory, similar to the medical education, that unless a student goes through 6 months of internship, engineering degree should not be awarded. And many institutions started asking us that how do we engage with industry? We are in a rural area. Some of the city institutions are able to make it very easily. We created a platform called Internship Portal of AICT, where there are more than 2.5 lakh plus internships made available. And one can log in there, and you can give your whatever interest is there, and industry's interest, when they are matched, physical internships where possible. We extended them to also virtual internships, where many of the companies give challenging assignments to students who can work from home, and then the solutions are looked at by the mentors. Further improvements can be made. Rich experience of the physical industry may not be possible, especially in hardcore industry, but at least from the IT industry point of view or software industry, internships can be both going into the campus of the organizations like TCS, Infosys, and Wipro, or it can be done online by staying at home. So I think internships also can be carried out. Interviews are being carried out. IIM admissions were all done by conducting interviews. So all variety of possibilities have to be engaged. On AICT side, I talked about various faculty development program, universal human values and student induction program workshops for faculty. I talked about examination reforms and examination reforms based workshops, Atal academies for the niche areas or the upcoming emerging areas. We have a NEET portal, National Educational Alliance for Technologies. Very many startups who have created AI-based solutions for personalized learning. They are all onboarded. So we have done many things which will certainly improve the quality of education on one side and make use of technology on the other side. And the name of the game would be the collaboration. So there may be excellent faculty in one institution in one domain, but not necessarily in another institution in the same domain. How can we collaborate, and whatever content we are creating, using, if it comes on a national platform like SWAYAM, it's fine. But even otherwise, how 1 or 2 institutions, 3 institutions can collaborate and pool their resources together and offer some of these courses which can be credit transfer based. I think these are all possibilities which we must continue to explore. Last but not the least, when we open up now, one important thing one area which we have to also address is psychological counseling for both students and some of the faculty members as well, because we are never used to such lockdowns. This is a shocker which first time in our lives has come, and many people were required to be at home for 1 month, 2 months, some of us 3 months, etc. Some of them opened up, some of them could not. And being at home, whether it is a 2-bedroom house or 3-bedroom house, ultimately it is like being in some kind of a jail. And therefore, a human being, which is a social animal, who socializes, whether it is in terms of birthday parties or marriages or social functions, you may have religious functions, cultural activities, drama, dance, music. I think we love to come together, unlike any other animal. This Homo sapiens, which has developed itself, that has all these characteristics, and suddenly if you're missing it for not just about 8-10 days, but about 2 months, 3 months, I think there will be issues, and we need to do counseling for many people. So those who are already trained, those who have got that wherewithal, or those who are interested in doing this, I think we must help our students to come out of this entire exercise as soon as possible when they come out into the physical spaces, and have a lot of activities which are not only academic but co-curricular activities like music, dance, drama, sports, and engage them and completely like detoxification. This is a different kind of a detoxification in social life, and that is also necessary to make them again start enjoying the life as usual. I think this is what is very, very important. The next one is about taking care of our health, hygiene, and importance of how life skills are developed, but thereby such shockers, if they emerge later, how do we take care? So whether it is a formal course or informal course, doesn't matter. I think health, hygiene has to be made mandatory from school times to all the things, including technical education. Last but not the least, MHRD has already opened up a new division, which is a research division, under which Indian knowledge systems has been given priority, and AICT has been asked to man this entire exercise of knowing what was there in the past, how it is relevant in the present, and how further research can be done in order to get dividends from out of that in the future. For example, whether it is Ayurveda, whether it is yoga, whether it is different kind of scientific investigations that India had made in mathematics or physics or chemistry, not only being feeling proud about that, and that pride is going to be inculcated right from school time to the higher education, but how some of those things are relevant even today, even though they were invented about 5,000, 2,000 years ago, and how we can do further research in those domains to make socially relevant and significant scientific contributions based on that. I think that is the future of the technical education, the way it has to go about. And this is what reimagination we all need to do. And only then probably and possibly we can be resilient, we can be flexible, we can be adaptive, we can be having a changing attitude that we have to develop. And if all of us who are in the higher education and at the top of the bracket, whether it is vice chancellors or principals or directors, if we really lead from the front, I think others will start following all of us, and I'm sure we will come out of this crisis. This phase will also pass. So I'm sure that we will be like business as usual very soon. With these few words, and let all of us take care of ourselves during this crucial time. Be healthy, do our exercise, yoga, and come back to normal life as fast as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for that enlightening talk. And I think you covered a range of topics, from institutions becoming resilient, adoption of technology, flexibility, and of course, leadership. I'll take a couple of questions because we have little time, maybe 5-6 minutes. I think the first one really coming around is, you've allowed credit for SWAYAM courses, but some people are asking, can you also allow credit for other MOOC courses, maybe Coursera, edX, Hadappa, and also can private institutions also take SWAYAM courses? I think that's the related question.
The first thing is creating new courses. I think private institutions are as much allowed as the government institutions. In technical domain, it is the NPTEL or IIT Madras which spearheads this, and therefore all IITs started off with this. Started with NPTEL and graduated to this way. Any other institutions, technical institution wants to offer courses, they can always approach IIT Madras, give a sample video, and then get it vetted and then start off that. If IIT Madras does not do it, AICT is also empowered to do it. You can always send a 3-minute short video along with the content of the course and what you want to handle, and we can allow as an independent national coordinator as well. So I think that is not an issue and not a problem at all. When it comes to private institutions or some other, MOOCs, maybe edX or Coursera, some of those courses being credited, I think it was not there in SWAYAM 1.0. SWAYAM 2.0 is being developed right now by IIT Madras. SWAYAM 1.0 was developed in AICT with the help of Microsoft. Now it is one level up. SWAYAM 2.0 is already in place, and there is going to be facility for other institutions to plug in. It is plug and play kind of a thing where people from other areas, domains can pitch in, and the course via SWAYAM 2.2 portal will go to the other portals and you can continue. I think that is the philosophy which is being adopted, and therefore your both questions are in a way answered. So only third part which you have not asked, I would like to tell is many industries. I talked about NEET, National Educational Alliance for Technologies. These tools are actually AI-based personalized learning tools in very many domains. And they were asking, why can't they be also considered for credit? The challenge here is, unlike an educational institution where there is wherewithal about evaluation, the system of evaluation, for example, conduct of quizzes or seminars, assignments and examination. I'm not saying that industry has no such possibility. Industry can also do it. But in educational institution, when someone has offered a course, he will complete it till the end, and including grading and giving the results. And suppose something happens and someone resigns and goes, or something mishap happens, there is always an alternative faculty in the institution and university who will not make it that the students will lose on that semester, on that subject, and that will be completed. I think that is slightly difficult today from industry, and unless we mature enough, and not only testing through your routine 3-hour examination papers, and which we talk about as Bloom's taxonomy, and understanding of the subject and open book examinations, you give innovative problems and ask them to solve, and then you evaluate. So if this is all being done and industry has about 5-6 people who will coordinate the course, I think even industry courses can be credited. I think there is no problem about that.
Another question coming, and I can understand that out of the 6,000 plus technical institutions, many have not been able to hold exams. There are students in remote areas who've not been able to study, children, students with disability who are facing difficulty. What is AICT guidelines to many of these institutions on how to deal with these transitions if people have not been able to cope up?
I think many people had great difficulties even in continuing the classes themselves. And in some places where they continued the classes, there was a difficulty in receiving the classes. Students were all in lockdown. They went to their villages, towns. Some places there were no bandwidth, internet connectivity, and so on and so forth. I think that difficulty was there, and that will continue in even online examination. And so there are different models that are possible. So one of the models which is pitched, and probably the UGC appointed committee might have given its report. I don't know the content, so I should not say out of the box something. But suggestions which we had given from the technical education side was, there has been a huge demand that the examination should be cancelled at all the universities in all the states. But without examination, giving a degree is also not fair enough. So a via media approach has been adopted, and we suggested this. Might be this is what is going to likely to come. Is a final year student who is in the 8th semester. He has already undertaken evaluation for 7.5 semesters. 7 semesters entire evaluation. That means right from internal assessment to the final semester examination. All 7 semesters are completely over, and every student has either CGPA or average percentage of marks available. In the last semester, where half the semester was already over. We started in January, and we March middle to end, we stopped all the activities. So there was some evaluation done there also. So if 7.5 semester evaluation is projected to 8 semester, I think it is not unreasonable. Whereas only 8 semester, some 20-30% evaluation made, if it is projected to 100%, I think the quality of grading would be very poor. I think that is one suggestion which we have made. The second suggestion is, anyone who is still feeling that he would have done better if had the final examination was held, why not conduct examination for such people? And I will tell you, 90% of the students who are in the middle normal distribution curve, near to up to 3 sigma plus and minus levels, they will all be happy with this mode. And some of them who get deprived and feel deprived, they will ask for examination, which will not be 7-8%. And even in face-to-face mode with social distancing, exam can be conducted within next 1 month for such limited number of students.
So I'm afraid, sir, we've run out of time, but real honor and pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much. I do want to pass on one recommendation. I think you brought in so much change into AICT. You brought in new majors, robotics, AI, blockchain. So there was a suggestion if you could also bring in courses that integrate business design and technology. I mean, and maybe you've already done that, but I'll stop here. And
we already have a program, postgraduate diploma or MBA program on the very same subject, actually, one. And then for all engineering schools, some electives on entrepreneurship are also part of the course. I think the people have to take it, that's all. No, we can only empower. Ultimately, we can take horse to the water. You can't make it to drink.
No, and I can tell you that you have done a lot to bring about that change. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, sir. Sorry about the technical glitch when you joined. We could hear you much longer, but maybe we'll get you back on a forum. Over 500 people were listening to you, sir. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah.
Hope to see you again soon. Vineet, thank you very much for conducting this in a crunch time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will now move on to our next session. We are running only about 5 minutes late, so it's no problem. We'll catch up. We have on track 1 another session where we are going to focus on the role of research in teaching. On track 2, we are going, which is the track on the resilient institution. Dr. Harivansh Chaturvedi is going to chair a session on reopening campuses and how should we think about safety measures. To join track 2, there is a link in your chat box, and you would have also received a link over WhatsApp and email. Track 3, which is the leading from the front track, which is by invitation only. Dr. Faizan Mustafa, who's the Vice Chancellor of Nalsar, is leading that track. It's called Navigating the Pandemic, the Professional Institution Perspective. There again, you will have a link in the chat box, and there you need a password because that's by invitation. You would have received the password. But without further ado, I want to take you to the track 1 panel that is about to start, which is a discussion on rethinking the role of research in teaching. Professor Pankaj Jalote, who is the founding director of IIIT Delhi, is going to lead this session with Dr. Prabhu Agarwal and Professor M. Balakrishnan. Professor Pankaj Jalote was the founding director, as I mentioned, of IIIT Delhi. He was the former chair of IIT Delhi, a chair professor at IIT Delhi, I beg your pardon. He's the former vice president at Infosys. And has a PhD in computer science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Welcome, Professor Jalote, if you can turn on your video. Professor Prabhu Agarwal is the president designate at NIIT University. He is also the president and founder of EduServe and the founding vice chancellor of the O.P. Jindal University in Raigad. He was previously the assistant dean at the College of William and Mary in the United States. And they are joined by Professor M. Balakrishnan, who is the newly minted vice chancellor of the Satya Bharati Institute of Technology, which has been a newly designated institution of eminence. Bala, as he's fondly called, was a professor at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Delhi, and was also a former deputy director. Welcome, Bala. Pankaj, I'll hand it over to you. We are running a little bit behind, so we'll have to keep to strict time, but we have the 5-minute leeway. So please go ahead, Pankaj, over to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And thanks. I can't see Bala yet. He's there, but okay, sounds good. So I think, okay, great. So as we discussed, we'll take 5 minutes each to share our views, and the remaining time we'll have question and answers. So I thought I'll just start with this and to get it going. So we are looking at rethinking the role of research in education. Of course, higher education, and I'm going to time myself. So education courses, if we look at courses when we teach, what we teach can fall into a range from where the body of knowledge is fairly well established to, on the other extreme, where the body of knowledge is evolving. Right? Established is where, the type of things we teach in schools, or the basic courses, foundation courses, where body of knowledge is fairly stable and well known. Evolving is in almost all higher end courses in technology areas, actually even in some of the foundation courses in technology areas where the body of knowledge bulk is evolving. So the first point I wanted to make out is, because there's always debate, should you be a researcher to be a good teacher in a college or a university? So my first point is the nexus between teaching and research is this, that if the body of knowledge of the course is fairly well established, all you need is scholarship. Once you've understood it, you can probably teach. But in all other areas where body of knowledge is getting changed and evolving, there only a researcher will keep up to date with the new body of knowledge, and therefore the quality of teaching that this person who's up to date will provide will be substantially better than the quality of teaching by a person who has not been up to it. Okay, so this is the first role of research in education I wanted to point out, and therefore I think in most good programs, you will always have higher end courses. So you really cannot have a good higher education program, particularly in areas like technology, science, and evolving areas. Okay, the second point is about a high quality program, is that if it is a high quality program, one would like to give opportunities. You don't have to necessarily do it, but opportunities for undergraduates in their program to participate in research. And again, this will enrich the program, this will enrich their learning, but it can only be done if the faculty members themselves are engaged in research. So the type of problems they can give will be more contemporary. Okay, and similarly, therefore, the type of capstone projects you can give, the type of advanced courses on in current latest technologies, latest methods that you can give, these can only be given by people who are engaged in research. Now, I just want to point out, theoretically, conceptually, you can be a scholar without being a researcher. But really speaking, those of us who've been involved in research know that you don't just keep reading, keep up to date. You read when you are working on a problem and you need to find out about who has done what, etc., etc. So theoretically may be possible, but really speaking, if you want to be a scholar up to date in the current knowledge, you have to be a researcher working in that area. So I will end with essentially that for high quality education programs, particularly in disciplines and areas where either there is some advanced courses which are on the body of knowledge that is evolving, or just courses like in technology and science, those places which have faculty which are active, more active in research, are more likely to give a higher quality education than other places. So this is why I believe across the world we see, even for undergraduate education, really speaking, the demand for those institutions which are ranked highest in research, that you see, whether it's Europe, US, or India, you see that. Okay, for programs like liberal arts, etc., where you do a range of courses, but just almost all of them in basic and foundations, perhaps research may be less important. So I will hand it over to Bala. I think I did exactly 5 minutes. So Bala, it's your turn.
Yeah, I will like to share my screen. I have a small presentation. Oh, can it be enabled?
I hope there is Shafali, someone.
We're just enabling it, Bala, no problem.
So can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me continue with the presentation. So just a second. So I think this I will skip because already I have been introduced. So let me go to. So I will just like to say about what is teaching. So I'm now confining myself to undergraduate teaching, not to teaching in a very holistic manner. And I am also taking a reference to be an IT-like institution. So many times teaching gets confused only with lab room instruction. So that's of course very important part, but there's just one part of it. There's laboratory assignments, how you set laboratory assignments, what type of assignments you set, exams and assessment. They're a very important part of the teaching learning process, and issue is what type of an exams a person sets. Unfortunately, in a very large university system, individual instructors do not set exams, but typically in an IT-like system, any autonomous institution, they also not only teach, but they also set the exams. Project mentorship, very important. Professional mentorship, this is beyond classroom. And then personal mentorship, which is again beyond professional. So in sense, a teacher is actually doing all of these, especially in institutions where students tend to stay in the campus, when there is an interaction which is actually beyond, many times even beyond the classroom. Of course, the challenge is, as these institutions themselves are scaling in terms of size of their classrooms, many of these things are not getting possible. Okay, so you're getting more and more confined to definitely first 3, but beyond that, the scaling is a very big challenge because as the number of students increase.
Bala, may I request you to put it in slideshow? Sorry to butt in.
Oh, sure. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, if already Pankaj mentioned it, and typically good institutions are supposed to have faculty which are all very research oriented. We insist on a PhD to become even at the entry level position. And many times students also have, the candidates also have a postdoc experience before they become faculty. But let's look at it. What does a PhD ensure? So a typical PhD, it ensures that he understands a subdiscipline. If you've done in an area, so he may not completely understand the whole discipline, but he understands the subdiscipline conceptually very well. And not only understands a sub-discipline, but he also understands its future trajectory. So these are, I would say, that the 2 things that any PhD or a postdoc actually carries when he or she comes to an institute as a faculty. So the advantage in this type of a training is only one advantage, is that it gains initial respect of students because of the knowledge of the subject. But unfortunately, a very little, often or no or little training in effective communication. There are many things you need to understand your student also. You need to understand. And if you go back to my previous slide, where we talked about, there are many other things like project mentorship, professional mentorship. Of course, personal mentorship goes into even more maturity in terms of life skills and so on. Those are completely missing. And obviously, we cannot expect that every person who is. But the problem with the teaching profession is that all of these, on one hand, you expect, but what you train is essentially only in terms of the research. I'm assuming that you are actually recruiting a researcher, which happens in. So this, I think, is already a challenge in our institutions because we have adopted this model of research, and unfortunately, we're also scaling numbers. Okay, same institution which are handling classes of 30, 40 today are handling classes of 100, 120. Class sizes have become very large, and it's also an economic necessity. It's a societal demand because it's a good quality education. More students want to study there. So there a lot of investments have gone into these institutions. So expectation is that it should grow. But then trying to handle this with people who are ill-trained. Ill-trained means they are not ill-trained in terms of research, but they are not trained in the other aspects of teaching is actually already a challenge. The other challenge is, again, this is very typical of technology and institutions like IITs, may or may not be applicable to everybody. So this way, I'm just talking about just my personal experience. Many of us, I discussed with it, many of people in my age group and my seniority have similar experiences. So we have always tried to incorporate research in UG teaching. Early years, because the PhD programs are small, the research students were small, undergraduates were very focused. And there was a time when undergraduates actually wanted to make research as a career beyond the graduation itself. Aspirations were to do research, and this actually situation persisted till mid to late 90s. Then actually it was very easy to motivate them and to do research. Okay, you could actually carry your research on to this, even research which is more esoteric, more academic, more publishable, more futuristic, not necessarily in terms of immediate impact. But the changes that have come in the society, the students, fewer and fewer students, even from these top institutions, are actually today not aspiring to do research after graduation. They want to join the mainstream in terms of industries, in terms of jobs, in terms of management programs, whatever it is. Okay, so, and this actually has created a huge challenge in terms of lots of areas where the research is much more deeper and requires a lot of effort in terms of understanding the background before you can contribute. Is very difficult to do when you do not have the same stake and the same motivation. Fortunately for me, in the last 10 to 15 years, due to certain circumstances, I get into a lot of applied research which has direct societal impact. Some of you may be familiar, some others may not. I started a lab called Assistech around 15 years back, which works for visually impaired, actually finding education as well as mobility solutions for the blind. And here I was very successful in attracting students to do research. The nature of research is quite different. You have to observe the needs and to find solutions. The solutions themselves are not based on very deep study. You can put solutions together much more easily from whatever is the knowledge that you have acquired as part of an undergraduate student. So here this actually worked well. And this is, I could mentor a lot of students, and a lot of students joined me. Many students actually joined even after graduation, continued to stay in my lab for a year or two, or sometimes even longer, to actually create an impact. So this is actually much more appealing to the student. But then the problem is that a lot of faculty are not trained to do this. At a later stage in life, you could realize it and you could connect with the society in a manner to be able to shift that. But a typical academic research is not so difficult, so easy for many of the students to. So I'm not finding a solution. I'm just giving you a challenge that we are finding. Of course, all of these, when you want to involve students in research, the scaling is a very big challenge because what a faculty member can work. So I'm still talking of undergraduate students. All of us are having PhD students and we know how to work with them, and those numbers are increasing, and that's a good aspect of our research ecosystem in the country.
So Bala, I request you to wrap up if you can. Thanks.
So that's the last point.
Yeah,
so, so this is actually scaling is a challenge, and we need to address them as we go along to make the education more meaningful and research oriented. Thank you.
Dr. Prabhu, it's over to you. Please try to, you have about 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to time myself. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, that would
There's always a risk of going last after two eminent speakers, after Pankaj and Bala. So, everything that Pankaj and Bala have so far alluded to, I strongly think strongly believe in those ideas. But I just wanted to raise this discussion to that next level. And I'm probably mostly speaking of research at undergraduate institutions, just to keep it a little bit more simple. And I want to connect the teaching to this concept of learning outcomes. Very often, like Pankaj mentioned in his 5 minutes, that there are well-established bodies of knowledge, and there it's probably just more meaningful to deliver that knowledge or give it away, or let the students grab that. But when we start thinking about the higher constructs in the more evolving courses, where we are actually looking at learning outcomes that are focused on the student's ability to critically think, the student's ability to formulate a problem and to find intuitive solutions. Inquiry-based learning, where we are talking about working in teams and collaboration, data-driven decision-making. I mean, these are skills that our faculty will only, in some sense, get if they are properly trained. And therefore, a good teacher, for me, is actually a good researcher to begin with, than a good teacher. I've met many people in a ways that I would say are great researchers, but cannot perform in the classroom. But I've never found, most of the teachers that I have really enjoyed in my class as colleagues or even as my faculty members have been great researchers. And the reason I believe is because they are trained, they have this ability to motivate students, to teach them the fundamentals of research. And I'm speaking at the undergraduate level. So I think we need to make that connect. What do we mean now by these critical skills that we keep talking about? These are timeless skills, especially in fast evolving areas of technology, where if I teach you a programming language today, I think that's probably by the time you graduate is probably old news. But if I create a inquiry-based learning pedagogy that is outcome-based, so I really believe this debate of teaching versus research is not quite what it should be. It should really be that high quality institutions must weigh them equally. There is no debate in my mind that teaching is above research or the other way around. The challenges are many. Many universities do not have centers for teaching and learning, which can really focus on that. This is the only profession I know where you are a teacher, you get a PhD, you come out and you're thrown in front of a classroom and you're told to teach. And I think everybody else, a doctor, a pilot, somehow has some kind of professional training when they go through that. So I think I'm just going to keep my comments short, and I'll be open to questions along the lines of reasoning that I'm talking about. I just want to add one more thing. The professors of practice, again, to me, are people who come into the classroom and are highly valued for their teaching. And the reason I believe is that their research is experiential, maybe not as scientifically driven, but their experiential, anecdotal experiences bring a lot of substance to the classroom. So especially in programs with management schools and stuff like that, where just dealing with reality in the world needs to be focused on, and professors of practice in that sense can sometimes do an outstanding job in the classroom and also create that spark, that curiosity. So for me, that curiosity, to ignite that curiosity in the undergraduate student is very important. So thank you for indulging, and give it back to Pankaj.
Okay, thanks a lot. I have another 4 minutes. I see one question which is there by one Dr. Jatin: why teachers need to do research? Though I've alluded, I think this should be stated just because we are all from research universities. Not all teachers need to do research. The question is only there are foundations, etc. Good teachers are themselves valued, and as Prabhu Agarwal was saying, people with experience are good teachers. It is when you come to certain kinds of courses where research becomes far more important. So for basic courses, etc., good teachers are valued, should be respected greatly, even if they're not doing too much research. You keep up to date and so on. Okay, any other questions? Let me just see if there are any other questions. Please type in. I believe you have to type in your Q&A. And I think while I see a question, I will take up one point from Prabhu forward, and I see research at you, but how do we balance between? So there's a question on WhatsApp. Research at UG level is a good idea, but how do we balance between the two? So somebody can take up, but typically in most research, in most UG programs, there would be some limited number of credits that can be done. So you don't sort of eat up all the UG education into research. If anybody wants to add to that, this was a question that came on WhatsApp.
So I think research can be just taken up, not in that traditional sense of delving deep in the PhD sense. I mean, even small research-based investigative projects course-wise can ignite that that inquisitive mind in a ways. So I mean, R&D can take many forms. R&D can be an independent study at the undergraduate level where the student actually has a curiosity about a certain thing and finds a professor that he has or she has linked up to during his course of study or her course of study at the university, and may pursue an independent study, which will be outside, just the normal way we think about it. Somebody asks me, how do you ensure that students are interested to learn? I believe that if you actually focus on their learning outcomes, then they will be interested to learn. I know I'm sitting with an expert on learning outcomes with Pankaj, so Pankaj may want to answer that question.
Okay.
One thing I would like to add.
Bala, please.
So,
Yes,
even in a regular undergraduate class, if there are some developments that globally happen, if you can bring it to a classroom and explain it, because in your field you are tracking it, it adds a great value to the education. So the whole way that the students, Prabhu talked about how do we create enthusiasm, because even in school, I actually remember the way that some of our teachers actually, let's say there's an incident, global incident happens, and if the person who is teaching geography, he comes and talks about it in the class. It's a huge learning, what you see in a newspaper or what you see here on a TV, those days only radio, no TV. So if it is explained in the class, it actually creates a very different interest because he or she can give you the background of that particular incident. Same thing in research also. If let's say I'm teaching about architecture and a new processor is released with some new computing paradigm, and if I can talk about it in the class in a manner which an undergraduate student can understand, it's a huge value to the course. And of course, these may not happen every day. There will be a syllabus and there will be, but whenever it happens, those are, I would say, inspirational points.
Okay, I have last one point I just want to say, and then we'll close it. So somebody asked about teacher, how deep in research. Please remember what we are talking about here is that if you are engaged in research, you can really do a much better job in some types of teaching. You don't have to excel in research. Of course, if you can, great, but you don't. So please, it's not so much pressure. You don't have to think that you have to excel in both. Those are only few who excel both in this thing. But the idea here is that you should, if you engage in research, you have various other ways to contribute into your course. Okay, and just last point I want to take from Prabhu, which he mentioned, actually just as a different, teaching learning itself is a research area, which in India we have very, very little investment in. This is something I've been promoting for quite some time. Let's hope something happens, because this is contextual and this is where students can also participate very easily, talking to your colleagues as to what works for you and all that. Okay, I think we are already 1 minute beyond our time. I was given till 5:10. So thank you very much for joining, and over to whoever is willing, whoever is to take over.
Yeah, I'm back. Thank you very much, Pankaj, Prabhu, and Bala. That was amazing. And thank you, Pankaj, for bringing up during our organizing committee meeting the fact that we should at least have one panel on research. And it's great to have you. Thank you very much all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we will now move on to our next session. Let me just bring up my slide to show where we are. Right, so we are just starting on track 2, the Resilient Institution track. A a session led by Dr. Souvik Bhattacharya, where work meets learning. They're going to talk about creating technical qualifications for working professionals. To join track 2, there is a link in the Zoom chat box that you're watching here. And if you click on that link, it'll take you to track 2. On track 3, we are about to start a new session called the Cognitive Principles of Online Learning, led by Dr. Jamshed Barucha. Again, the link for that track is in the chat box. And there is a password to go into that track because it's an invite-only track. And I'm hoping that you all who have the invitation remember your password. It's the same password as yesterday. Let me then move on to introducing the session on this track, which is led by Dr. Sundar Ramaswamy, who is the Vice Chancellor of Kriya University. The track is entitled Reconfiguring the New Normal. And joining him are Dr. Ranjan Banerjee and Mr. Shashank Bira. Sundar is the Vice Chancellor of Kriya University. Dr. Ramaswamy is the chair of the board and on the executive committee of the Asia Foundation. He's also a distinguished college professor from Middlebury College and former director of the Madras School of Economics. He will be joined by Professor Ranjan Banerjee, who I can see is already on screen. He's currently the Dean of the S.P. Jain Institute of Management and Research. He's a former CEO and managing partner of Invention Consulting and a former CEO of Renaissance Strategic Consultants. He has a PhD from the University of Minnesota. And I also see that they are joined by our third panelist, Mr. Shashank Bira. Shashank has been doing consulting and advisory for many years. He's a managing partner of the Hearth Advisors, formerly with Copper Beach, country head and CEO of the Global Education Management Systems, and has an MPhil from Cambridge. Sundar, welcome, and Ranjan and Shashank, and Sundar, it's over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Pramath. Just want to check whether everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Excellent, very good. And thank you very much, Pramath, and for Ashoka and Harappa to organize this very exciting set of days. And it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome both Dr. Ranjan Banerjee and a good friend, Shashank Bira, who I've known for a long time. I think the topic is something that's been occupying all our minds in terms of reconfiguring the new normal. We have about half an hour, and what I thought is I'll just say a few words to set the context and then maybe invite our speakers to start the conversation going. For a research paper that I was doing on global liberal arts a couple of years ago, I came across an interesting factoid that of all the organizations that human beings have created that have lasted 500 years or more, right? So you go back to the 16th century then. There are only 85 institutions that are continuously operating. And 85 institutions that we as humans have put together that have lasted 500 years or more. And if you think about the last 500 years, they have been incredibly tumultuous. It starts with the printing press, then you get into the Industrial Revolution, imperialism, the World Wars, the Great Depression, and now, of course, the current pandemic rolled into an economic crisis, rolled into a social justice crisis, right? And so I began to sort of follow through on what are these 85 institutions. The thing that came to mind automatically were religious institutions like the Catholic Church, some of our own religious madams that have lasted for a long time. As an economist, I knew joint stock companies and business organizations didn't exist till the late First Industrial Revolution. What struck me quite surprising was that 71 of those 85 were universities, right? And Shashank, you come from one of them. But not just the Cambridges and the Oxfords, University of Padua and so on and so forth, right? And even the Harvards don't make the cut because Harvard is 16 something, right? So as a university, which of course initially had connections to religious teachings, but nevertheless, university as a center of knowledge production, dissemination, creation, and education means it has withstood some of the most tectonic shifts that society has seen. And there is maybe something in the notion of a university that has made it last. And of course, universities have gone bankrupt, they've gone under, but the concept of a university was fascinating to me, that out of the 85, 71 have been universities that have withstood such major shocks. And the time will tell whether the current shock that we are living through will change the face of what we call universities, right? So it's against that backdrop, and we can talk about what universities are. I mean, even in the last 20 years, as the MOOCs came along, and I remember there was a lot of flurry of activity in the US, whether digital universities and MOOCs will wipe out the sort of the day-to-day classroom teaching of the big public universities or small colleges or whatever. And in some ways, universities sort of internalized them and kept going. And now, of course, as we are all scrambling to figure out what the new normal will be in terms of how do we move into the digital realm by choice, how will it enhance education, how do we promote online, everything, all the aspects of it, right? I feel like I have two really very interesting panelists. Shashank, given your long experience across multiple continents, Dr. Banerjee heading a top-notch business school, but given your experience both in industry and coming from the academy, it'll be great to get your thoughts on whether you think, this too shall pass, as Lincoln once said, and universities will figure out a way to address this, because that's what universities have done, going back to my preamble comment. So Shashank, why don't I'll turn it over to you. I think we have about half an hour, so I'll ask each of your comments to be kept a bit brief, and then we can continue a conversation rather than long monologues. On to you, Shashank.
Thanks, Sundar. And, Sundar, I've known you for over 3 decades. And I got to know Sundar when we were at university, right? And we were at university separated by 2 years, and he was an economist and I was a physicist, right? There is absolutely no way we would ever have met if we had been in an online digital-only university. There's absolutely no way we would ever have even known of the existence of each other in that university if it hadn't been for actually just hanging out together in ways that were not connected with the academics. My wife and I are from the same college that we went to. My brother met his wife at university, right? And there are many, many experiences that all of us have had of making friends, of hanging out, right? And so therefore, the death of the university is a little premature, in my view, because there's a lot more than just the teaching, learning process and the research that goes on at a university. The university is also about life. And I think when we are talking about the pandemic didn't hit learning, it hit life. Right? And what the pandemic has affected is not that it has changed the way we learn, it has changed the way we live life. And so if we're going to be talking only about the way the pandemic hits learning, we're missing the point about the fact that what the pandemic has actually hit is life. And incidentally, it happens to have hit the way we do learning. It hasn't directly hit learning. Right? Now, as Sundar also mentioned, we did have the Gutenberg press, and we had the word processor, and we had MOOCs, and we've had these tools for a very, very long time. Now, I've been involved with online learning in the higher education space from the late 1990s, 97, 98, right, on it. It's a pretty long time. Now, in that long time, things have changed a bit. We've got broadband, we've got better cameras, we've got, we've got more expert systems. I can't really say we have artificial intelligence. There were things that were called machine learning earlier, which is being called artificial intelligence now. Names change. But have we got really new algorithms? Yeah, it's only storage that has changed, and some new algorithms have come in. But fundamentally, has there been 25 years of change the way it has been in other sectors of technology? The answer is no. Right? And in 25 years, technologies have changed, but learning technologies in higher education haven't. And it isn't because lecturers and professors have not taken up these technologies. There aren't technologies out there which are worth 25 years of development. So we are in the middle of a pandemic, and therefore we have to rely on the tools that are available. And what this is going to do is that the naysayers are going to see that, hey, look, there's some very, very useful tools out there. Can I integrate them with my teaching and learning? Can I integrate them with the way I do things? Right? And people who may not have adopted some of these technologies may now start looking and saying that, okay, maybe there's something useful here. But I'll just give an analogy. I'd like us to think of ourselves as paramedics in the middle of a catastrophe. We are not the neurosurgeons. These new technologies are helping us keep the patient alive. They are not a substitute for what the neurosurgeon does. And if the paramedic in the middle of a catastrophe starts thinking that because, I can scale up, there can be lots of paramedics, there can be lots of people with ambulances, and I can handle the situation right now, that this is what is going to be the new normal, and I will replace the neurosurgeon when, I don't need the neurosurgeon. I'm afraid just carrying that analogy forward, I don't think that's going to happen. I think when things come back to normal, we will need face-to-face teaching. We will need the way universities are, we will need them to continue. And I think that we are not in a systemic transition to digital higher education. I don't think there is a new normal out there. I think we will use digital technologies more effectively in the way we do things. We might become more efficient in the way we use them. We may have all kinds of techniques that we did not adopt, which we will adopt. But will it change the face of higher education? I'm afraid I don't agree with that. And if I'd like to make a statement that if we feel that the face-to-face university is going away, right? And if you can't make a face-to-face university viable and you need to scale up using digital, then I think we might as well pack up and go home. I think the face-to-face university is here to stay.
So thank you, Shashank. It's always good when you only have half an hour and you have really terrific panelists with lots of experience, that somebody stakes a claim that sharply creates the contours of the debate, right? So in a way, I can see a lot of merit in what you're saying. And as everybody who knows me will accuse me of being a biased academician who's defending the nature of a university. But nevertheless, it's good to have that viewpoint out there, because I think you raise a very compelling point that with the technologies that have been with us for 25 years, it has in fact supplemented but not completely replaced what the great universities of the world have continued to do. And interestingly, whether this shock will do what previous shocks did not, time will tell, but I'm glad that you set the tone that you did. Ranjan, on to you. And I don't mean to suggest that you have to be necessarily oppositional, Ranjan. I mean, you may have the same views, but nevertheless, it'll be great to get your thoughts.
So Sundar and Shashank, Sundar, I thought your factoid was really, really interesting, and I'm going to borrow that and quote it liberally. I agree with both of you, but maybe let me just take not a different or a contrary tack, but let me put it this way. The great institutions of the great academic institutions, there is an opportunity for them in this crisis. And if they leverage the opportunity, they can emerge stronger and enhance their value propositions. I don't think face-to-face will go away. Particularly, I don't think the conversations beyond the classroom will go away. It is the ability to catch a professor in a corridor, ask a question, and that question metamorphoses into a 2-hour life-changing conversation. Those things happen by accident and environment. You cannot build that into design. So I think I'm completely with both of you on that. But let me talk about the opportunities. I'll talk about 3 things. If I had gone to my faculty and said, in the next 15 days, all of you need to learn to teach online, there would have been 100 good reasons why it could not have been done. But there was a crisis, there was a situation, as Shashank said, it was the best option available. Within 5 days, we were teaching online. Within 10 days, we realized we had moved too fast. We auto-corrected. And we realized, for instance, you have to hold fewer classes online, you have to teach less online, you have to make some adaptation for the condition students are in. But the adaptation has been made faster, and we realize that there are some things we can do online well. Okay, so that is an important piece of learning. The second is, in any crisis, you must ask yourself, what assumptions are you able to question? And I will look at one very simple assumption, that if I want to source the best international faculty for my institute, my earlier visiting faculty model was that please visit my institute, come and stay at the Marriott for 3 weeks. And because I only have you for 3 weeks, you have to finish your course in those 3 weeks. Now, I think both students and faculty are open to the fact that you can have online classes, and online classes can be, let's say, 25% of your mix or 30% of your mix. And this allows me to source the best visiting faculty from across the world. I can relax the assumption of travel, and that will enrich my value proposition. The second aspect, which is an opportunity, is that when you look at internships, internships for our students in Singapore and the US were few and far between in recent times because visas got tightened. And our students want to do an internship and then use that internship to get a job, so that no longer became attractive. But now that people are willing to look at remote internships, again, the possibility of doing projects across the world and students competing globally as well as collaborating globally. So I think there is an opportunity here that we need to look at, number one. Number two, we have learned some online tools. And the point is that some of these online tools can be leveraged in a classroom environment also. And I will give you a very, very simple example. I teach a subject called design thinking. And normally in design thinking, groups of people put ideas on post-it pads and stick them on a whiteboard. And there are 5 people standing around a whiteboard and putting those ideas up. There is something very dynamic. And the first reaction is that can't be done online. But you go a little bit deeper, and there are tools like Padlet, where you can send people a link, and they can not only create that equivalent online, but they can post video also. So it is enriching. And I might want to even augment my physical classroom with that. So I wouldn't want to look at this as either or. So this is why. Correct. The final point is this. I think the great teacher in a face-to-face classroom and the interaction and the energy that represents, you can't replace. But the fact is, if there are 500 great teachers in India, maybe there are only 10,000 students at max who have access to those 500 great teachers. If online can make the best teacher available to 100 times the students at a significantly lower cost and reduced effectiveness, it is reduced effectiveness. But the point is that is a value proposition. But my point is, it's a separate product. These are not competing products. Your face-to-face product will have its place. But if you're saying that there are people who don't get good teachers, then online can be a way of creating a different value proposition and a different value model. And the way I would look at it is these are supplementary. I've probably exceeded my time. So Sundar, I'll hand you back. There are a couple of pieces on lifelong learning I may want to come back to later on in the session.
Right. So I think Ranjan, you had some very interesting points to add to. And I think all of us as academics will agree that we always will keep changing. If anything, a good academics has to keep learning, right? So we will take what has worked from online, incorporate it, and keep going. And I liked your other line that it's a straw animal to say it's an either or. I mean, I think right now, because of lockdown and so on, it's sort of seeming like everybody's doing online. But when we come back to some side of normalcy, online presence may increase, which will coexist with on-site face-to-face. And I think that's the way I think I'm hearing from both of you. In terms of channeling some of the questions that have come about, I think some of the comments are more comments. But one of the questions that Ranjan, you're from a business background, business school background, and even within the business school, there's a range of courses from accounting to, say, as you put it, design thinking, right? And Shashank, I'll push you to think about some of your earlier backgrounds in terms of the humanities and the sciences, right? So the pedagogy of teaching online accounting or calculus is different than literature or philosophy or conducting a lab course or theater course. Can you shed some light on how our faculty across these disciplines, right? So because teaching is not a monolith, the academy is not a monolith. And so, from your experience of, say, your colleagues teaching accounting versus design thinking, or a lab course versus a discussion-oriented course, how does online sort of prepare the instructor? What should the instructor be aware of as students maybe go more online in the coming months in terms of teaching courses? Let me start with you, Ranjan, and then come back to you, Shashank.
So let me expand accounting, because and say, let us say accounting, let us look at statistics, let us look at econometrics, let us look at quantitative subjects. Let's look at subjects which are more quantitative, where often the faculty will do, for instance, Excel-based exercises which are being worked on by students in groups or individually, where they're working on with the faculty. What we have found is that a combination of synchronous and asynchronous is something that is effective. So for instance, if I am going to run a linear programming problem in the class, where I'm doing it online with some students getting disconnected in the middle of the class, etc. What helps, and we did a workshop on this, what helps is that if you record some part of your working in an asynchronous, send that asynchronous video out to the students saying you study the working before the class, and then you solve the example in the class. So, I think the combination of asynchronous and synchronous is what we have found faculty have been able to do. But the one thing is very clear: you need to go slower. You need to go slower. You need to check more often for feedback. So my sense overall, and this may be simplistic, a good teacher is a good teacher across formats. Good teachers figure it out. Some of the weaker teachers actually do much worse in an online format because the absence of feedback is it blunts them. And I think also the faculty, it's with any new technology, if you embrace this as a learning opportunity, you will figure out a lot of things. If you're worrying about the things you can't do from your physical classroom, and that unfortunately is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
very well said. Shashank?
So I'd just like to add a couple of things here. I'd like to add that peer-to-peer learning is a very critical element of the higher education experience, right? It's not only a professor lecturer talking to a bunch of students, right? And that peer-to-peer learning is in its infancy as far as e-learning platforms are concerned, whatever is called AI and e-learning, et cetera, it doesn't matter. The peer-to-peer learning experience is terrible, right, on it. Maybe technologies will improve, but that bit is not happening through e-learning, right? It's really some version of lecture capture that's happening. Right. And depending upon whether you have somebody who's comfortable in front of a camera or somebody who's not, you'll have a good session or you won't have a good session. Right. And as people have said, there's bad teaching is bad teaching, no matter which platform you use on it.
Right.
Okay. The second thing I'd like to say is assessment. Right. Now, when you have an online learning environment, your assessment options get severely limited. On it. Now, in an age when standardized testing is losing the sheen it, in my view, never should have had, right, on it, and you're going to lose that entire set of standardized tests as being something which is tremendously valuable in determining intelligence, right? You're going to have to look at really, really sophisticated techniques of assessment, which can be done digitally, which I haven't seen yet in pretty much any platform. Right. Anything that is emerging requires the kind of broadband that universities at their end don't have, leave alone students. Right. There's some sophisticated techniques that have been coming, but so these are all actual problems. I think we don't have the technologies, we don't have the pedagogies, and we haven't thought through the entire process of teaching, learning, peer group interaction, the informal learning that takes place, and assessments. All of that is not only about lecturing.
Yes. So can I come in?
Yes, Ranjan, please.
So I want to say I agree, but I would like to share a personal experience. I taught a class of 28, and because you don't meet the class beforehand, before I did the class, I reached out on WhatsApp, asked all of them to introduce themselves, and asked them to talk about their experiences of online learning. And Shashank, exactly what you said. The line came that there is no peer-to-peer learning on online. We then taught the class, and then halfway through the class, I moved some of the classes to asynchronous, and I said, guys, you prepare an action plan, and then I will do Google Hangouts with you in groups of 4. Yeah. And I did Google Hangouts in groups of 4, which were 40 minutes with 4 people. And then at the end of that course, I realized that they had started doing Hangouts with each other. And my sense is you cannot replace the offline, but people start realizing that there are other things that they can do to replicate some aspects of peer-to-peer learning in an online environment. It improves over time. I'm only requesting that we guard against something. You know, I'm a traditional teacher. I'm a traditional teacher come facilitator. I like the classroom. I like the sounds of thumping desks. The point is that there is something called the confirmation bias, which is that if I have deeply held subconscious beliefs about something, I will look for evidence to support those deeply held subconscious beliefs. So I think when we look at online, we must approach it with the objectivity of a researcher and not with, let's say, the arrogance of a lifelong classroom teacher. So it's a very tough dividing line to cross, because I am myself guilty of this. But I have realized that if I had 7 conceptions about online teaching and what it could not do, at least 2.5 to 3 it could do. So I mean, I'm still with you, Shashank, but I'm saying the divide is not as sharp, because I know that, for instance, our students are doing calls, they're doing group work, they're doing online work. My sense is that in group sizes up to 25 or 30, one can compensate a bit. The moment it goes to 70, 80, classroom is so far superior. That's kind of right. And it's purely experiential. Here I'm talking as purely from my own empirical observation.
Right, and I think that's a fair point. That what we would have to modify what works online, because you can't just take what worked in the classroom and put it on a computer and call that online teaching. It's a whole range of other activities that you both have mentioned that are equally important. And now there are social media platforms, and this generation certainly has taken to this platform the way fish take to water. So in some ways, for them to have corresponding Google Hangouts and social clubs that meet online may facilitate the peer-to-peer, because that is equally very, very important. One question that I want to sort of ask both of you to think about, because we are going to be going online, because this is the reality of, let's say, the next 3, 6, 12 months, depending on, even today, IIT Mumbai came out as the first major institution to say they're going to go online for the whole year, and so on and so forth, right? How does the employer, so after all, students come to college to get a degree, they may go to graduate school, but many of them are going to get jobs. In the longest time, in the last 20 years, employers still held out that what happens in a classroom, in a brick and mortar university, or if the online is done by the brick and mortar university, still has value. And so the demand for such graduates was driven by employment. Now we are in a situation where we have to go online. Do you think this will cause employers to look at online differently than they had not all these years? It is starting to happen, but in the last 20 years, that move is still not as dramatic in terms of placement, average CTC, all of that. And I'm looking at you, Ranjan, because you're heading a business school where the whole purpose of people coming to necessarily get a degree is because they want to get placed. But the whole purpose of any student, I think, listening to this, doing a degree, is they want to get a job and a career. But employers, do you think there'll be a change? And employers is a big black box. I mean, the range of employers. But I'm just curious, in your sense, will employers have to change at how they assess the graduates coming out in the next year or two? Because a lot of what they would have learned would have been done online.
I think the proof of that pudding is largely in the eating. And it is largely in how we are able to make it effective. Currently, if you talk to the premier institutes in India, they are still saying that you will have a hybrid model and the students will come back and we will have a mix of both of these. But on the employer side, I'll tell you one thing I do find, that when I speak to technology companies today, and I speak to technology CEOs, if I speak to 10 technology CEOs, 8 out of 10 are telling me, COVID or no COVID, we are going to move to 50% plus work from home. So I think employers themselves have realized a lot of things about remote communication, number one. Number two, when employers go to premier institutes particularly, they're valuing many things. But I think one of the things that they're valuing, honestly, is the quality of your admission process. Is the quality of the selection that has taken place So I think it is really up to us to ensure that our students are as well prepared as before. And my sense is that the largest challenge, the way I would look at our school particularly, and I know that if I look at Priya or Ashoka, they will be speaking of a similar language. We believe we are educating the whole human being.
Right.
Which means beyond the curriculum, it is about values, it is about experiences, it is about reflection, it is about learnability. And I think some of those processes, we need the university. It is that education of the whole human being and the whole university experience. And I think that as long as we can build a hybrid model in a convincing enough way, one, it should not impact. There is an impact in the short run, which may be purely economic. India currently is going through 4 crises. There's a health crisis, there's a financial crisis, there is a social crisis, and there is an economic crisis, and all 4 have come together. So there is a larger impact that we are talking about. But my sense is that if we can get the student's mind right, if we can, quality of input we can control, quality of learning we should be able to control, but we should get the student's mind right. If the student is himself or herself less confident for any reason, then that will impact the employer's perception. But I think in good institutes, we should be able to take care of that. My sense is employers are opening up because employers are realizing, for instance, online meetings are often more effective than offline meetings. We don't spend 15 minutes deciding what to order and another 5 minutes looking at what happens when the order comes. So there are areas where we have realized. So I think the openness will be there because it is happening across the board. As we speak, the IIMs have done their summer internships online. So there has been some learning already for employees.
Very good. Excellent. I see Pramath is back, which means that's my call that we are winding this session. So thank you, Ranjan, for your comments. And thank you, as always, Shashank, for setting it up really well. I think both of you said some really good, important things about, both challenging what a new normal means, but also about what we can do to reconfigure as a learning organization, which is ultimately what a university is, to prepare our students so that they feel like they're not going to miss out over the next year or so, because that's ultimately our responsibility to give them the education that they hope to get. So thank you, both of you. And Pramath, back to you, and I will take your leave.
Thank you, Sundar. Thank you so much for conducting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please join us and stay for the next keynote address by Professor Barrett Anand, who's the Vice Provost of Advances in Learning at Harvard. The address is titled Retooling Harvard, and I'm happy to welcome again Ashish Dhawan, who's the founder and chairman of the Board of Trustees at Ashoka University, to please moderate this session.
Thank you, Pramath. It's my honor to welcome Professor Barrett Anand, who I've known for many years. Barrett is a professor at the Harvard Business School. Amongst many other things, he was the one who actually led the HBX initiative at Harvard. And when Harvard Business School made the choice to go online after some reluctance, they chose a very different model from edX, which was a collaboration between Harvard University and MIT and many other institutions. And HBX has been very successful at many levels. And Bharat can talk about some of the initiatives there. And then Bharat moved across the river to Harvard University and is currently in the office of the provost as the vice provost for advances in learning. Most recently, with the transition to online teaching, Bharat has had to coordinate across 12 schools at Harvard. as they have all made that transition to online teaching, and over the summer are looking at a variety of different improvements. And Professor Datar spoke yesterday about the transition at the business school. So Bharat has a much wider perspective and also is leading Harvard X. And so we really look forward to his presentation. Thank you, Bharat.
Thanks, Ashish, and thanks, Pramath. It's a pleasure to be here and join all of you. Let me just share my screen. Let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, we can see it. Just
Perfect.
make it full. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. So, so what I thought I'd do is focus my remarks not just on what's happened in the last 3 months or what's to come in the next several months. As Ashish was saying, my background is a strategy researcher. Most of my work is in the area of digital change and digital transformation. And I got pulled in to help lead the online efforts at Harvard Business School about 7 or 8 years ago in the context of our own digital change. So what I thought I might do is actually share 3 sets of observations. The first is sort of our own reflections and experiences as a university in making the move into online pre-COVID. So essentially over the last decade. And the reason I think that's important is it's easy to sort of lose sight of what the trends in the space were, given just the major disruptions in the last few months. But I think many of those trends, in fact, will persist. So I just thought I'd start with those remarks, then focus a little bit about sort of what really were the implications of COVID-19 for teaching and learning in the last 3 months in the spring, and what, if anything, might be different in the fall. And I'll try and make the case that I think the fall presents the opportunity to think quite differently than what happened in the spring. So let me just start out by sort of describing to you the basic challenge that we were confronting about 7 or 8 years ago. And really, this is a challenge that I think any university has to confront, which is this is our classroom, right? This is the Harvard Business School classroom. The architecture looks obviously different in many settings. But the key question is, how do you capture, just to the last session, the magic that takes place in this classroom when you move to an online medium, right? And in a sense, when we started thinking about this, sort of there's a simple way to do it, which is just literally record what's happening in the classroom. So just video capture, transfer it online, you can stream it to 1 million people, which is fabulous in terms of scaling education, but it's not so good in terms of engaging each individual learner, right? Because if all you're doing is just watching what happened in the residential classroom, you're now a passive learner. So that's sort of one downside. And when we think about, most efforts at scaling online education, they run into this challenge between scale and engagement. The flip side is, what if we actually interfaced with small groups of students in a live session online? We can actually make it very engaging, in fact, almost as engaging as the actual classroom. The challenge, of course, there is scalability, right? Because if all you're doing is now reproducing the interactivity between the faculty and the student online in small groups of 20 or 30 or 40, you run into the challenge of scale. So I just want to pause here because to my mind, this, regardless of what's happening right now, is the fundamental trade-off in online education, is the trade-off between scale and engagement. And virtually every value proposition, every organization, every university, every nonprofit and for-profit, in my mind, is trying to figure out how to break this trade-off, right? With varying degrees of success. I mean, you see literally these models on the two ends, which is live synchronous teaching with small numbers, where, as we just heard, when it gets beyond 30 students, it's challenging, and streaming courses to 100,000, but there the completion rates, as we know, are pretty low. So I just want to talk about sort of what we had done over the last 7, 8, 9 years. And I'll focus my remarks on the effort that I led at Harvard Business School, but really this applies more generally to the university. Before I do that, it's useful to actually just think about what constitutes an effective learner experience, right? And I'm intentionally putting the student at the center of this, this box. And our first instinct, of course, is content, right? So over the last 9 years, we created 100+ Harvard X courses on edX. We created our own platform at the business school with about 15 courses there. And that's the core content, right? These are the ideas you're taking from the faculty who are experts in these domains and essentially creating courses out of this. I would submit that this is a very small part of what constitutes an effective learner experience. And I just would love for you to reflect on this for a moment, which is what are the other drivers that impact the learner experience holistically? And as you think about it, there's at least 3 other aspects here that turn out to be critically important and somewhat obvious in reflection. The first is pedagogy, right? It's not just about content, it's about delivery. No matter how great the content, if you're delivering this through basically lecture mode for 75 minutes, well, you better be inspiring as a lecturer, otherwise it's not going to be that effective. And if that was true offline in the residential classroom, that's true in spades online, right? Because imagine listening to a lecture for 75 minutes in a lean forward medium like we have with the desktop or mobile. The third is community. And we just heard a little bit about this, about peer learning, the social interactions, the serendipitous interactions, the familiarity and trust, and the networking that students get on campus. And the last is context. And this is personal context. It could be social context. It could be national context. But when you think about these 3 dimensions, I mean, they have profound implications for the learner experience, regardless of whether we're talking about offline and online. And so I just want to pause there because, as I reflect on the future of learning or education, it's useful just to keep this at top of mind. By the way, several years ago, as Ashish was saying, I had captured a lot of my own work on digital change in content industries writ large in the form of this book called The Content Trap. And really sort of this describes, in a sense, the title conveys, I think, this basic point that I'm just making. Okay, so when we approached online, sort of how did we take these ideas into account? The first thing was thinking about pedagogy, right? And one of the things we did was, again, just back to what Ranjan and others were saying, not try and replicate the classroom per se, because the moment we try and do that, you're going to run into all the constraints about trying to replicate the aspects that are really great about the residential experience, as opposed to taking advantage of the digital medium. So what we did was very reductionist. We said, what are the principles of pedagogy that make for an effective learning experience? And we boiled it down to 3, which is inductive learning, and I'll talk a little bit about this. Active learning, which is you're part of the conversation and the learning experience, as opposed to being a passive observer. And social learning, which is peer-to-peer learning. And what we did was we said, let's take these 3 principles and then really imagine or reimagine how these principles would express themselves in an online medium. This really was the approach that we took to building what was called the HPX platform, now the HPS online platform. So it was really a platform whose design was informed by the pedagogical principles, as opposed to starting with technology and then trying to force fit it into the teaching and learning experience. I just want to share an example here about inductive learning. So, I'm an economist by training, and for the longest time, the way we've taught economics to our students is through mechanisms like what you see on the left here, right? If we're teaching fixed and variable costs or marginal costs, we typically draw these graphs, provide the equations, and try and provide some intuition therein. It turns out when I was actually creating the Economics for Managers course 7 years ago, I interviewed about 9 undergraduates who were 4-year college majors in economics, and to try and help me on this course. And I asked them one question, which is, why is the difference between fixed and variable cost interesting to someone in the workplace? And it was very sobering that almost none of the 9 could answer that simple question. Why? Because we end up almost overcomplicating things. We end up starting with theory and then trying to connect the dots almost as an afterthought. So what we did when we were trying to create the online courses, and this is very much in the spirit of Harvard Business School, is start with the problem, right? So on the right-hand side, you see this question: why were book publishers threatened by the launch of the Kindle? We're not telling you this has anything to do with fixed costs, but as you start trying to probe and peel the onion in trying to answer this problem, you end up with the concept on the left-hand side. And research has shown this, but we've also seen this in our experience, which is the moment you situate these concepts in something that students can relate to, the retention is far greater, the engagement is far greater, and they deeply understand these issues in a totally different way. So that was the basic idea of inductive learning. And this applies, by the way, not just to business, it applies to almost any kind of discipline, right? Whether it's history or sciences and so on. So what we did was, we said, okay, let's launch 3 courses. And these were designed to really target our entering MBA students and pre-MBAs and undergraduates. And we started building a platform along these lines. What was very interesting was after a few months, I had 3 MBA students working with me, and they kept saying something that I realized we were not listening to. They said, Professor Anand, we don't just learn from the faculty in the classroom. We learn in the study groups. We learn from conversations in the lunch corridor. We learn from interactions in the gym. And what was very interesting was I realized they were basically talking about social learning, which is one of the principles we had identified, but we had completely ignored this principle in trying to create the content. And the reason I point this out is here I am writing this book called The Content Trap, and we were falling into the very same trap. That's how insidious this issue is, right? So what we did was basically completely pivot the platform design effort and said, let's actually think about how to bring in community and peer learning into the design of the platform. And this is just to give you a sense. The first page of the platform is a global map with bubbles all across it. You can go in and you can click on a bubble and you can see who's there from each town or city or place around the world, and you can message people, right? There's no anonymity. You have to put in your profile picture. The first day we launched this, there were 300 students who logged in, and there were 13,000 profile views by the end of the day. Basically, what they want to do is check each other out, right? The content can come later. We first need to build that trust and familiarity with each other before we can engage in debate. Then we added a few other things like real-time polling, updating. So we had a 3-minute rule. There's no lecture, no text that takes longer than 3 minutes to actually read. And part of this is just to simulate the active learning experience. Once you fill in the answer, you can see what other people have answered. You can direct message them. You can engage in conversations. By the way, all of this is asynchronous. One of the critical issues, so we had a design principle, which is how do we make sure if we're going to scale this, that we do so with limited faculty interaction once the course has started? Because if all we're doing is having live faculty as content experts engaging with them, all of us have residential teaching duties, so we won't be able to scale this. And so the critical aspect to make this work was peer learning. And I just want to talk about this for a second. Most online platforms, I think it's fair to say that discussion boards just don't work, right? We have 3% of the students or learners accounting for 97% of the comments. And why is that? Well, one, because you have these long threads of comments, it's very difficult to search. Secondly, there's no incentives to actually engage in conversation, right? It's not directly tied to the course grade. And so what we did was literally just take these few problems, think a little bit more intentionally about how we might define or describe peer help. And this is what we ended up with, which is the discussion boards are local to each content page. So you can actually search for the questions very quickly. We gave them incentives. We said part of your grade depends on the extent to which you ask and answer questions of each other. And by the way, that little tweak was enough to get 75% of the students moving to the discussion boards. We also try to overcome fear by saying, when you ask a question, tag your question. You can say, I'm asking a stupid question. But the moment I say that, it takes away the license of someone else to say I'm asking a stupid question. So just to get over that fear factor. By the way, the thing we were worried about was, will the students answer each other's questions in the right way? And for the first few weeks, we had content experts on standby, ready to jump in if the discussions went off track. And it turns out the number of times we had to jump in was exactly 0. In other words, every single question that they were asking of each other outside the main content areas was accurately answered by their peers. I mean, it's like very humbling in a sense, right? They don't really need us. They need us for thinking about the content, the curation, the process of discovery. But this is what now starts allowing learning to scale. And by the way, this was our experience. This is no different than what we're seeing in many other domains. Everyone's familiar with the hole in the wall experiment by Shagata Mitra in India, which really had kids trying to figure out how to use a computer along the same lines. One of the other things we did was take some aspects of the residential learning experience and try and simulate that online. There's the famous cold call, where in the classroom, we call on students suddenly at random to make sure they're paying attention. So what we did in the online platform was create something called the online cold call. So if you're going through the course, suddenly at random a pop-up appears and it says, Ashish, you've been cold called. There's a clock ticking in the corner. You have a minute to answer this question, 30 words or less. And your answer is visible to the entire cohort with your profile picture. Okay, so that's just a small way to try and simulate this idea of active and peer learning. And you can imagine the learners' reactions. I mean, the first time they're just frozen. And then over time, you realize, wow, this is a wonderful way to learn. By the way, what's interesting is in the classroom, I can only cold call one person at a time. When you go online, we can cold call 300 people at the same time, right? And get the advantage again of collective reactions. So this is essentially how we built the platform. We launched this 6-7 years ago. And what was striking was not just the engagement and the scalability, but the learning outcomes. So this shows you essentially the performance of students in the blue bar who have never taken any course in these topics. And after 11 weeks, they've almost caught up with students who were 4-year majors in economics, business analytics, and accounting. I mean, this is sort of just sobering to think about, right? In terms of the impact of what online can do. By the way, there's another synchronous platform we built called HPX Live, where you can talk to 60 students all over the world live. And part of the reason I just show this is that it's very tempting for people unfamiliar with online education to think that, oh, Zoom is the only platform or Zoom is the best platform. It turns out Zoom isn't the only platform or the best platform. Zoom was just built for COVID, right? Because all of us had to be in our homes, not just the students, but the faculty. The universities were closed. So we, in fact, even couldn't take advantage of platforms and spaces like this, right? And Zoom became, in some sense, the default medium. What's interesting to us is those online interactions have given rise to offline interactions. So in fact, going from online to offline, just as some of the previous panelists were saying. And part of this is this notion of building community, right? You don't need to start building community through the residential interaction. You can actually start it online as well. Okay, so that's the backdrop. And I just want to emphasize sort of one point there, which is online education at its best, we know now can be engaging, effective, and transformational. And, oh, by the way, scalable, right? And this is pre-COVID. And part of the reason I say this is there's often a false comparison between residential and online, right? We're thinking about the best of residential, and we're thinking about the median online experience. And that's apples to oranges. We're all familiar with residential learning experiences, which frankly are pretty lousy. But the point is, let's in fact think about what's possible here, right? And then how to get to that frontier. So COVID, okay. So this is 3 months ago, March 10th, the university announced, like the same for many of you sitting around India and around the world, that we're going to move into lockdown. And we had about 9 days to prepare for this transition. And Srikanth yesterday, I think, spoke in detail about this transition for the business school. The same transition was happening, obviously, across all the other 11 schools at the university. Just give you a sense of the scale here. Over the last 9 years, we had about 300 Harvard faculty engage in online learning in some form through those asynchronous course creation. In 9 days, we had to move to 3,000 Harvard faculty moving into online. So this is a fundamentally different problem. It's a problem simply of transition during a crisis. You're trying to change faculty habits within 9 days, which obviously is really hard. The community aspect essentially disappeared overnight. And against that, you have the backdrop of the pandemic, equity issues, access, and just personal disruption for students, right? Just to put this sort of a little graphically, so if you will, this is sort of the residential experience, right? This is the campus experience. You have classes taught by faculty, you have social interactions, you have faculty experts closely interacting with students. Most students are located within their individual schools, and you're interacting with alums through events and so on. And what did COVID-19 do? This basically just disappeared. So what happened here? So Srikanth talked about the transition to getting faculty used to Zoom, and that was happening across the university, not just in the business school. But one of the things I want to just talk about very briefly is coming back to that simple idea of content, pedagogy, community, and context. Even as faculty were making the transition to Zoom and learning about the platform itself, we wanted to make sure that the pedagogical principles were not lost. So just as our colleagues on the technology side were making sure Zoom is integrated with Canvas, in my role as the Vice Provost for Advances in Learning, what we did was basically spin up within 36 hours a site called Teach Remotely at Harvard. And this is open to anyone, so you can access this. But the basic point was, let's not be so obsessed by the technology and the platforms and the Zoom features, but let's actually focus attention on what it takes to deliver an effective session, a learning session through Zoom. What was interesting was we actually created this, and this really was taking advantage of all the learnings we had over the last 7 years. But we created this for our faculty in a sense. It turns out there's now been about 150,000 people who've viewed this site, which was frankly unbelievable to see. And the vast majority are outside Boston. So if any of you find any value in this, the idea was just to provide some tips that were concrete, actionable, and simple for our faculty. The other thing that we were thinking about is what happened to the social experience. And so basically after the first week, we also created a web-based calendaring platform so that any student, staff, or faculty member could basically offer an event that was open to any other member of the university and list that event on this one simple site called Socialize Remotely. By the way, just to give you a sense of the problem this is trying to solve, on the residential campus, almost all social events happen within a school or a house or a section, right? It's rare that you have students from the undergraduate college mixing with students from the med school or the business school, partly because of the distance, but also partly because of calendar listservs, and we just get used to our tribe, so to speak. So we said, might there be an opportunity here to have people at the university engage with everyone else at the university in a truly one Harvard sense? And if we can do that, we're now seeing opportunity that we actually didn't have pre-COVID. And hopefully this kind of opportunity or interactions might last. So we launched this, we had a team of technology experts who basically built this within 10 days, which was incredible. And just to give you a sense, Michael Sandel, who teaches justice on our campus, he offered a session on pandemic ethics. About a week later, there were 1,100 people who participated, about 550 on Zoom and the others interacting through YouTube. And what was interesting was we had over 50 faculty join this session, right? Which almost never happens. You had students from all different schools at Harvard engaged in this session. So these are the kinds of opportunities for socialization. And this is faculty to student, but you can easily imagine similar student-to-student interactions that might occur if you think about this more intentionally. So at the same time as all this is happening, as I said, we had 100+ courses that were built up over the last 9 years through Harvard X. Through edX, we made these available to any currently enrolled degree student across the world. And some of you might have taken advantage of this. This is just to give you a sense of the explosion in online demand, right? And this is mid-April when the Open Remote Access program was launched. Just to give you a sense, pre-March, we would have probably about 25,000 learners a week for our 100+ courses. That jumped to about 900,000 learners a week. So this is a 40x increase. And this, frankly, is really sort of where edX Campus, Coursera Campus, and others are trying to make the online content available to universities around the world for the fall. So, so the thing I just want to sort of touch on a little bit before I start talking about the fall is this notion that the spring 20 experience was a very constrained experience in some sense, right? We were inheriting the residential calendar. Overnight, everyone had to leave and work from their homes. So you couldn't use any part of the physical campus space. The curriculum was set, the calendar was set. It's what I call the online PDF version of the residential experience. All one was trying to do in some sense was make it the best PDF that's possible, right? This was not an online first experience. Under the circumstances, I have to say it was pretty incredible what happened at the university, and which might be some of your experience as well. We had satisfaction rates which were very high when it came to the actual learning of content material through the different courses. Obviously, the thing that was missing though was the extracurricular, the co-curricular, the social experiences, which students and faculty felt, that was a profound sense of loss in terms of that in-person interaction. But I have to say, the efforts of our faculty, our staff, our students were truly inspiring during this period, just to try and make sure we went through the 9 weeks in the best possible way. Okay, so what's going to be different about the fall? Let me just come back to this visual and just reflect on this for a second. As we think about the fall and what might be different, one of the points that I just want to make is several of the constraints that we had in the spring actually go away when you have the luxury, so to speak, of whiteboarding what the fall experience might look like. So what are some of these ideas? This was, by the way, a document that we wrote about 2 months ago, trying to actually articulate what the possibilities are. And many of those ideas were expressed in an article that I wrote in the Boston Globe, which came out about 2 weeks ago. The basic idea, though, was the following, which is, there's a tendency for us to think about, let's view this just as a temporary state of affairs. Let's get through these next 3 months or the next 6 months. And the quicker we can get back to the residential experience, the better. And of course, all of us want to get back to that in-person experience, right? Given the richness. But I think we might be missing an opportunity, which is if you flip this question on the head and say, what are the shortcomings of the residential experience that we might actually try and address through the virtual medium or the virtual experience? It suddenly starts opening up a whole range of possibilities. Just coming back to this visual that I described, if you actually think about the residential experience and you pause for a moment, you realize that there's many constraints, in fact, that we face on campus. The first is that every single course relies on one faculty member or maybe a couple, right? So I'm learning only from one expert in each course. The second is limited global experiences, right? Which is why experiential programs have become so popular in recent years. Everyone's located together on campus, which is great for social interaction, but we don't really have that experiential component of being in different places around the world. Very limited field work. The social interactions, as I said, mostly confined to your department or school or house. You're going at 3 classes a day a pace, so time for reflection is often also limited. And as you start thinking about this, you realize, wait, maybe the online medium allows us to address or tackle or take advantage of some of these opportunities in a way that we couldn't in the residential experience. So just to seed the imagination in a sense, these are some ideas that I described in that article and that we're starting to work on for the fall. The first is cross-university courses. So in the history of Harvard, there have almost been no cross-departmental, cross-school courses. Why? Because it's really difficult to get faculty to co-locate from different schools in the same classroom on a regular basis. More importantly, for the students to travel from Harvard Yard to the business school or the medical school is really hard as well. Maybe, given that we're all one click away, this time now affords us an opportunity to create truly cross-university courses. And this is one of the things we're doing for the fall, which is creating courses on climate change, pandemic ethics, hopefully a course on race and social justice, a course on social change, which will include faculty from different schools and departments, really a multidisciplinary approach. and open to every student in the university. The second is, can we take advantage of geographic dispersion of our students as opposed to treating that as a liability, right? So if students are spread across the world, and 6 schools have already announced that learning is going to be remote, there's still Harvard College, and that's probably going to have students back on campus. But if students are going to be remote, can we actually take advantage of this geographic dispersion and integrate it into the curriculum? So for instance, you can imagine for most types of courses, not just having a content or curricula-based experience, but have students work on projects or draw in local data or local experiences wherever they are around the world and feed that back so that we can aggregate those experiences to really think about geographic variation. So rather than look at this as a remote experience, maybe we can look at this as a global experience in the fall. So this is something we're just starting to work on as well. The third is individualized attention, right? Advisors, when they interact with students, you've still got to go and meet the advisors on campus. It takes half an hour or 15 minutes to go to the advisor's office, interact with them. Again, if we're one click away, we can have these advisory interactions almost every day. We can have faculty and staff from across the university engaging in advisory roles with our undergraduates. So these are opportunities, again, that we're exploring. The fourth is drawing from experts anywhere. And some of you might have experienced this, which is when experts are one click away, we can actually draw them into our classes in a way that we could never do earlier. So just to give you a sense of this, the Economics 10 course, which is the basic foundational course for all undergraduates, in the spring, after we moved to Zoom, they basically had a former Secretary of the Treasury, the chief economist of the IMF, the head of the central bank, all participate as guests to interact with the students during the course. I mean, it just makes for a much richer experience, right? When we start thinking about the kinds of people we can draw in to speak to our students as part of the curriculum. The fourth, as I said, is socializing in a way, virtual socializing that really sort of transcends these tribes that we typically have. And the fifth is the calendar itself, right? To the extent that we don't need 3 classes a day because that leads to platform fatigue, really sort of have shorter session times, move some of the material to asynchronous, make the asynchronous experience engaging, think about the calendar in a more flexible sense, focus on a few priority courses. These are all efforts that are now underway. The point simply is, again, that as we think about the opportunities that we face in front of us, on almost every dimension, we can start to do things that are different from the spring PDF experience. Right? Clearly, we've gone down the learning curve. One of the things that one might use an analogy for is in the spring, what essentially happened was faculty were getting used to Zoom, right? And you went down the learning curve. But at the end of 9 weeks, you basically get the learner's permit, right? It's not like it's not like you have the experience to drive on the highway. Hopefully now, with all the learnings from the spring, and we put together a faculty survey report really capturing the observations of nearly 1,000 faculty, which we're disseminating to the faculty, training and pedagogy workshops over the summer. But that's just one aspect. If we think about courses revisiting the synchronous asynchronous mix, creating new asynchronous materials that are engaging, a more intentional curriculum, university-wide courses, global experiences being drawn into the curriculum, a more intentional social calendar. Some of the things we're doing is also trying to think about dynamic 360 images of the campus that we can use to almost have students mimic their experiences in terms of trying to just meet each other serendipitously on campus through virtual apps. And finally, the advisory roles and issues to do with inclusion and equity, not just Wi-Fi access and broadband or tablets, but how do we really think about this as a more personal experience for every single student, as opposed to simply teaching them in large classrooms? So these are the opportunities that we're thinking about. And really, frankly, it's exciting because our hope, I think, is that we use the fall not just as an opportunity to reimagine online learning, but hopefully we start engaging in some of these experiments. And frankly, some of them may not work. But if we can find traction in some of these ideas or projects that we can then take back to us once things settle to the new normal in the residential setting, now we start thinking of technology supplementing or complementing the in-person experience in really profound ways. So that's just to give you a snapshot of really the last 10 years. I mean, where we were pre-COVID, what happened in the spring, and how we're starting to think about the fall. And it's just, I think, as for all of you, a truly challenging moment, I think, in thinking about what the future of education is. But in my mind, really a really exciting opportunity as we embark on this journey. So thank you. I hope those reflections were useful.
Thank you, Bharat, for a scintillating presentation. I think you really pushed our thinking in terms of reimagining the campus experience in the upcoming term in the fall. And also the idea you shared with us in terms of your experience building HBX, in terms of an engaging, effective, and scalable online asynchronous learning experience or platform. We only have time for one or two quick questions, so I'm just going to club them together. There was a question around IP issues with digital media, particularly courses, and how do you guys think about that? And then there was a question about sort of the behind the scenes. Can you give us a flavor of what it takes to produce these online courses, and how do you train faculty to get them ready to engage with this pedagogy? You talked about the social learning and different aspects, particularly the inductive pedagogy and getting familiar with the medium itself.
Yeah, no, those are great questions, Pramath. So let me just touch on the first. So with respect to IP issues, it's actually interesting that this question actually goes hand in hand with what I was describing about creating asynchronous materials in a way that really mixes and matches sort of different experiences in short chunks. If you have a 60-minute video, it's pretty straightforward for me to just record that video and put it up somewhere, right? And then all we need to do is track the IP addresses, and that becomes basically a technology challenge. It's much more difficult when we have courses built in the way we do, with 3-minute videos followed by a poll, followed by a reflection. You have the social experiences. Now suddenly trying to unbundle that experience and sort of almost mimic that, in some illegal sense and put it somewhere else is much, much harder. I would say the more challenging question has to do with assessments, right? Which is trying to assess performance online. By the way, when we created HBS Online, one of the ideas we had, which we implemented, was we said, why don't we decouple the assessments question from the actual online learning? So what we did, as you know, Pramath, was for the final exam, we actually had students going to in-person testing centers. And we had partnered with Pearson, and they have their 3,000 centers around the world for the SATs and GMATs and so on. So the final exam, we had an in-person monitoring happening. But for the rest of the course, it was essentially an online experience. By the way, there I think we're pretty comfortable now also saying that we're ready to move to virtual testing. The key issue there is, again, mixing and matching, which is if you have multiple choice questions, you can't just rely on the same 30 questions test after test. So we create a test bank of 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 questions, where each student on any test might get a different set of questions than any other student. And so again, that becomes much harder to overcome. The question about training faculty. So this is a great one. I would say the secret sauce to everything we did in the last 7 years, and probably the most difficult thing to do, is to get faculty to think, and even content creators and writers, to think in terms of this inductive learning idea. By the way, even for faculty at the business school who are used to case method teaching, right? David Garvin, who was one of my colleagues who passed away 2 years ago, one of the most inspiring teachers that any of us have met. When he was creating the online course, he came and he said, okay, Bharat, here's the case. When are students going to read that? And I said, no, they're not going to read that. We've got to actually take this case and chunk it up into 3 paragraphs. And he's like, oh my gosh, it's a completely different way of creating a course. So that's one aspect. But the other is this inductive side. The way I'm describing it to my colleagues, and this is this is not something unique to the business school. In fact, every discipline has a different way of describing this, is really think about creating material, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous, in almost three different components. The first is when I get students into a classroom, or when I'm having students engage with online materials, how do I provoke them to engage on the particular question that I want them to engage on, right? What is that opening question that's provocative, that's interesting, and that's relevant? So that's almost the first part of it. And this could apply to history, English, sciences, anything, is provoke. How do you provoke them? The second is how do you get them to discover the ideas on their own, right? It's not just, you get them to answer a question, but almost create this journey where either through interactivity or through peer conversation, they can get pretty far to discovering the underlying idea or concept or theory. At that point, the faculty might step in and say, here's really the concept that we'd love for you to understand. So, but that's the second big chunk, which is discover. And the third big chunk is generalize, which is once I've understood that concept, the real power of learning now comes from saying, oh, and by the way, this idea is not just relevant in this particular setting or case or geography, but here are the 9 other settings where the same concept is relevant. That's really the power of the faculty in trying to help students understand that, right? So it's really what I call provoke, discover, generalize. And in some sense, what we're trying to do is just create simple examples of this in all different settings, whether it's history or biology or physics or economics or sociology or medicine. And frankly, this is the muscle, right, that you need to build. And it's a really difficult muscle to build. But once you do it, it's intoxicating, not just for the faculty, frankly, but for our students as well. So that's just to give you a small flavor of how we've been trying to go about this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bharat. I'm sorry we're strapped for time. We would have loved to continue the discussion, but really a brilliant presentation. And I'm sure people will take away lots from that and really look at bringing about significant changes coming into the upcoming term, but also thinking more broadly about, I think in India, we're still at the early stages of online learning. And I think you've left us with some very interesting thoughts in terms of how we can make it engaging, effective, and scalable. Thank you again for participating in the conference.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you, Pramod. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you for moderating. Thank you. Sorry to crunch you guys up, but thank you.
No.
Thanks.
I'm delighted that we are moving on to our next session. If you are wanting to attend the Resilient Institution track, on track 2, Rupa Manjari Ghosh and Professor Srinath Reddy of PFI are discussing managing the complexities of public health education and inequity. The chat box has the link. Please click on it. On track 3, Atul Khosla is leading a session on improving access and success, how to reach every last student. Again, the link to that is in the chat box. And to go into track 3, you will need a password. And all of you who invited actually have a password. So please go ahead and join track 3. Our panelists for this session are here. And without further ado, our chair for this session is Professor Dheeraj Sanghi from the Punjab Engineering College, where he's director. They are going to talk about bridging the gap. Can online be the big equalizer? Professor Ajit Chaturvedi from IIT Roorkee and Professor PJ Narayanan from IIT Hyderabad, all good friends. Dheeraj is at PEC, the director there. He was at IITK, and he was also the former director of the LNM IIT Jaipur and a PhD in computer science from University of Maryland. Professor Ajit Chaturvedi is director of IIT Roorkee right now. He was earlier the deputy director and dean of research at IIT Kanpur. He's also a PhD from IIT Kanpur. Incidentally, both of them were my classmates at IIT Kanpur. And of course, we have Professor PJ Narayanan. Hi, PJ. And, he's the director at IIT Hyderabad, our neighbor at from ISB. Also a PhD in computer science from the University of Maryland and very well known in the computing machinery field. So Dheeraj, over to you. Don't worry, while we started late, we do have a half an hour and please go ahead.
5 minutes each, and then we'll take the questions. Okay. So now let me just define the problem that we are going to discuss. Right? There are a lot of people who are saying this online business is going to create divide between people who have access to internet or devices and learning environments and so on, and people who don't. To me, it seems that this divide is really, this is going to bridge this divide, because right now there is no quality education. There is no option that you have but to go online. Today, our GER is supposedly around 26-27%. But if you look at the quality of our institutions, not more than 2% of our students or our youth is getting good quality education. You may think of that as 3% or 4%, but nobody in this country agrees that there is like all 27% are getting good quality education. So people who are getting good quality education already is very, very tiny. And I think this online can provide good quality education to a much larger number. Now, there are some people who are saying access to internet is an issue, and they give you numbers which are really not true, because like even yesterday in one of the sessions was said only 36% have access to internet. Now, if you look at the number, it says 36% of India accessed internet at least once a month in pre-COVID days. Now that's being quoted as 36% people have access. Actually, we have almost 90% of our population who have access to internet. They may not be able to afford it, is a different issue. Right? So the affordability issue is there, but I would argue that affordability of internet-based or online education is much, much better than affordability of studying in a brick and mortar building. After all, let's just say instead of coming to a hostel for education on the campus, suppose you were to just come to the hostel and use the infrastructure of the campus. Now, is that less affordable? No, this is actually more easily affordable. Right? So I think we have an online system which is much more affordable than an offline system. Currently, we are not able to look at that affordability because we are saying that all other costs will remain the same. This is an additional cost which people cannot pay. But my argument is that a lot of other costs will go away, and this will become a cost which is more easily affordable. So I think, so of course there are issues in terms of campus life has a lot of social parameters. A lot of equality comes about because you live with people from different regions, different religions, different castes, different kinds of people. So you build tolerance, and those are the issues that may come up. And so there are genuine issues about whether online education can always be as good a quality as offline education. And we heard a beautiful keynote saying that yes, it is possible if you design it well. But those are not the issues for this panel. This panel is whether we are going to bridge the gap or we are going to create a bigger gap. With these small words, I'm going to first ask Professor Chaturvedi, a good friend of mine. We were together in IDK as students and then as faculty members. Ajit, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Sanghi. I think it's a very, very timely topic that is being discussed here. And let me directly come to the topic. And I have no hesitation in saying that yes, online can be the big equalizer in bridging the gap. That answer is, I don't think, a difficult question to answer. We believe that this will throw up many new opportunities. This will improve the scalability of education. And when I say education, I do not restrict myself to only primary education or higher education. I also want to talk about education that happens beyond when you have graduated from a university during your professional life. And I think the Coursera's of the world are a very good example that they are able to reach out to a large number of middle-aged people, senior people, to be able to get new skills, new education, new science, all those things they can pick up. And then, of course, they can make use of it in their professional life or just for their own satisfaction. But having said that, as somebody who has been a part of technical education for very long, I do have several worries also. And one of the biggest worries is that while, yes, it will be possible to share content, it will be possible to deliver content. But then, is the university education only about delivering and sharing content? University education is much more than that. The student comes out from his home, the student comes into a new environment, he lives in a hostel, he makes new friends, he inculcates hobbies, he learns from his peers with different backgrounds. The diversity that he encounters in the education system, whether it is in terms of economic background, in terms of social strata, linguistic background, ethnicity, different countries, citizenship. So that is a very, very important part of education. Now, how will that happen online? I mean, that is a huge challenge, that while one aspect can happen, but this very important aspect that builds up our personality, that builds up our attitude towards life, about education, about things, that comes only when you come out of the confines of your home and live with students, your fellow students who are of your age group, and maybe have occasional sort of very intense, heated discussions, sometimes friendly banter, sometimes you go together, then you develop like cultural skills, you develop technical skills, you make very interesting projects, you become a team player. How will a team player happen if the student remains in the home? How will projects happen if the student is relying only on online education? My second worry is about experimental skills. Now, while online is definitely maturing, in fact, if you ask my view about its maturity, then in the last 3 months, it has matured more than what happened, at least in a country like ours, than what it would have matured in the last 10 years. So I remember that when this COVID started, and at that time, the kind of reluctance that many of us had in conducting meetings or in conducting lectures, no, this is not possible. This is not a substitute of chalk and blackboard. And suddenly they have become very involved, very intensely involved. They find it very convenient. They find as if life has not changed. We are able to talk, we are able to discuss, we are able to do everything that we want to do using this online. But then what about laboratory? What about doing, sitting in a lab and sort of struggling to get your experiment going? After all, laboratory skills are not only computer skills. You can do computer programming sitting at home, but how will you do electronics hardware? How will you do chemical engineering? How will you do civil engineering? How will you do mechanical engineering sitting online, virtual? In fact, today, the Honorable HRD Minister has tweeted about this virtual labs. I think it is getting a serious push again. But then this virtual labs will try to address the concern that I'm saying, but definitely we are very far from where we need to be. And third, of course, I think many people have already talked about it, and that is the assessment part. Both the continuous assessment as well as the assessment in terms of final assessment. Continuous assessment, I think we have made big progress, but in terms of final assessment, there are several technological solutions that are available. But I think universities and teachers have to get used to it, have to get comfortable to it, and have to build some sort of a trust with it. All said and done, we are moving in the direction where online is inevitable, and online will definitely bridge the gap. But will it be able to completely substitute brick and mortar? I think the answer is a clear no. So I think both have to coexist, and how they will coexist, only time will tell. I think I will close my opening remarks here. Thank you, Dheeraj.
Thanks, Ajit, for those wonderful remarks. May I now request PJ to speak up on the topic for 5 minutes. Again, PJ has been a good friend for the last many years. We did PhD together in Maryland. So both Ajit and PJ are my batchmates from different programs. PJ, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dheeraj, for inviting me to this, a very interesting session. This is one topic all academics in the world have been worrying about. Good thing is we are, most of our institutions, especially the Indian institutions, are very conservative. We were not taking online seriously, and this COVID forced us to do that, and we are discovering it is not as, it's not something that we need to fear as much as we used to fear. So that's a good thing. And people are able to devise new solutions. But I would like to say this online has the different scenario. Typically, online courses are very good at imparting very specific things. If the course has a very specific goal, you want to achieve this kind of skill, this kind of knowledge, this kind of something, the online courses can be quite effective. And that works very well in more informal setting, including if you want to say master's level teaching. When somebody has done a bachelor's, say in engineering, if you're done a BTech and you want to do an MTech, the expectation is the candidate is serious, they're motivated, they're interested to go the little extra mile to learn things. And in that setting, the online mode will probably be as good as or almost as good as the in-campus mode. But given the reach that you can get through online, it probably has advantages. In other setting where the formal education up to including bachelor's, definitely schools, like Professor Chaturvedi said, the education is not about those specific skills only. There are many other things that you learn in college, which you learn from peers, you learn from teachers, you learn from good teachers, you learn from bad teachers. And that experience, it's not very easy to convey through this online mode. And so is the question is, can institutions that almost all of us are in this panel are obviously part of elite institutions which have the capacity to do a decent job or good job of teaching students in person. So will it a good substitute for students of those institutions? And that answer will clearly be no. But then so that is all the reasons have been laid out. What Professor Chaturvedi also said, there are many things which you cannot teach through. Labs, etc., virtual labs and other things make it better and better, and maybe you can even do a decent job of that. But still, the wholesome experience that you get in college, you cannot substitute. And there, I don't think anybody is even saying that close down IITs or close down Harvard and go online. That's not even being talked about. Dheeraj brought about the other point where there is a huge middle there who have, maybe they are in colleges, maybe they're undergoing classes, but they are not getting the right, they are not getting their right level of education, right kind of education. And for them, does online work? That certainly, now you are comparing not the experience of in-campus experience of students in IIT or IIIT, but the other colleges where they are getting a degree, all right, but they are not instructed or get led properly. Is this a good medium or to provide the much higher level of learning? I think there is a huge scope there. Again, online is something that you would if the students are seeking out the knowledge, it's a very good medium. So in some sense, online courses for many subjects from MIT courseware or from Coursera, from NPTEL have been available for many years now. And there was also initial criticism when all these Coursera and all came up that good textbooks have been available forever, and in theory it's possible to learn from textbooks. But our people are not doing that. Our students are not doing that. They have not removed the need for in-person classes. The next level is good videos are available, and will they remove the need for good classes? So if there is enough motivation and having good, NPTEL, probably at least the old NPTEL was just repetition, just recording of 1 hour lectures, which is probably not a very inspiring way of getting people into the subject. But modern MOOCs and modern courses are far more engaging, and there is a whole role that that online education can play in bridging this gap. The gap I'm seeing is gap between the elite institution and the other institutions. There is and they're all getting a degree anyway. Now, if say IIT Kanpur or IIIT Hyderabad offers say I don't know if you call it a BTech something, which is in several areas that reaches to 1,000 people. Each of their experience will not be as good as the student who comes to my campus here or the IIT Kanpur campus or IIT Bombay campus. But their experience is way still better than what they are otherwise getting. So how do we do that? There are very creative ways of creating programs which will help in bridging this. If you can do that, I think online has huge scope. I will stop my remarks here and we'll come back if there's something.
So I think a question that I would like to ask both of you is, the comparison is not whether somebody remotely can get an education as good as three of us got in different IITs. Okay. The comparison is, as I said, 98% of our youth have no education whatsoever, right? Don't you think that it will be extremely difficult for this country to build 10,000 IITs, right? But it is possible to get through online education something which is not as good as IIT, but something that they can live with. They can get a good job, they can get a good career. Ajit, would you like to address that?
Yeah, first thing is that I would not say that only IITs give good quality education. I would say that there are several other institutions which give good quality education. But yes, for a country of the size of India, no matter how much you increase, whether NITs, triple IITs, IITs, or other CFTIs, or even some good state engineering colleges or universities, we are still far, far away from where we need to be. So in that sense, there is absolutely no doubt that, yes, this will play a very important role. And in that sense, we can thank COVID, that if COVID would not have happened, then we would have continued to bat for no, blackboard teaching. There is no substitute for blackboard teaching, and this is not right. And I think online is only for people who have graduated, not for students, not for people who are going to earn a degree. That kind of debate is settled. And it has played a very, very important role of a catalyst, and we are moving in that direction. So definitely this was required, this has happened, but that doesn't mean that we have reached the final solution. I think we are still far away from there.
PJ, before you reply to this, by the way, when I said 2 to 3% good education, that 2 to 3% means about 4 lakh students. And therefore, I'm including NITs and many state colleges, and not just engineering, but law and commerce and arts and so on and so forth. So if you include all these colleges, then you get about 2 to 3% seats. Yes, PJ.
Yeah, so I already said there is tremendous scope in addressing that segment or equipping that segment better with online material or online education. Now, I think the challenge there is the platform or the medium of online lectures has already proved itself that it can be reasonably effective, or it can be quite effective in that. The challenge would be in creating regulatory and other frameworks to make it happen, and of course, improving the experience. I mean, online is not just one Zoom window and some slides. There are today with many technological and pedagogical and other cognitive research, you can create far more engaging lectures or experiences, and which all will be worth it, or there will be enough impetus to do that if you know that there is a huge market out there, and somebody is supporting that. That is the government or education institutions or fees from these people are supporting this whole thing, and there is possible. So that is one is developing much higher quality. I want to say quality in multiple dimensions, quality content or high engaging content for that. But even more importantly, creating the regulatory or administrative framework by which such things are possible. Somebody is enrolled in a engineering college somewhere, and they are taken some courses or these engaging courses they took from somewhere else. How do you give them that certification in some sense? I mean, so I think the challenge is more more there. The platform and the medium has proved itself sufficiently.
So yes, I think what you're saying is there are regulatory issues. Yesterday I think there was a discussion about, can there be a credit bank that you do credits from anywhere and you place those credits in a credit bank, and once you've done with sufficient credit, you get a degree from some university. I think operating of a credit bank is one regulatory situation that we need to take care of. Ajit, are there other regulatory hurdles that you see in promoting education online?
Forget regulatory hurdles, Dheeraj. I see that we teachers they are struggling a lot in terms of doing good assessment online. I mean, regulatory is outside the institute. What about inside the institute? Inside the institute, I think I can see a very tough road ahead when next semester, when we want to do online teaching, which is almost the direction that we are taking. But then how will we do the sort of a midterm exam, end-term exam on this scale? Although there are a lot of vendors and technologies that are saying, no, it's all foolproof, everything is there. But unless we imbibe that, unless our students and teachers get more trust into that, I think the initial issue is there only. Once inside the campuses, the issue is settled, regulatory issue will not be far away. The real issue is inside the campus.
So I want to say something about that, Dheeraj. I think this ball is squarely on our court. The professor's court. I think we are all used to this standard exams, quizzes, tests, and very high pressure, proctored, humanly proctored, etc. I think time to go away from that has come, and whether it is COVID or no COVID, if you move, you take even a few inches away from the traditionally rigid mode that alone comes to our mind when we think of assessment. It'll be good for education at large. I mean, you include more projects or teamwork. See, one of the major problems with online education is promoting teamwork. I mean, whereas now pedagogy says teamwork is the more important thing. Give team assignments, etc. So if you can, this is again creativity in pedagogical and other aspects required. And I think professors like us shedding our age-old ideas and embracing something new. But it's a challenge, but I think it's well needed, even for students who are on this campus, on the campus. I think, I hope 5 years from now, they're assessed differently because of the thing that we did now.
So PJ, I will come back to you and ask, like we have talked about that there are issues in off-campus and on-campus, and assessment could be one roadblock or mental block, social gatherings, etc., etc. Should we not think in terms of mixed model, where let's say students spend some time on the campus, and if I were to say that student, let's say in a good college, spend only 1/3 of the semester on campus to take care of labs, to take care of the social situation, take care of exams, I can immediately have 3 times the students, assuming faculty can have some scalable model for exams and so on. I can simply have 3 times the students, and that would, you don't need to build more infrastructure to handle the same number of students. Would you agree with that?
I think that's a very good option that we should explore. We mean as a country we should explore because it's true. I mean the social or the laboratory and other environment. I mean, yes, 100% is good, but 50% is better than 0% for many people. And so if you say 1/3 is a very good idea, and that can we did it for some of the executive education courses. We started with on campus. 200 people used to come every weekend to the campus and run that course. And then the next version of it, or 2 years later, we created a thing where we expanded to the country. There are many the registrations across the country. They all come for 3 days, a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, to our campus and have in-person classes, in-person interaction with each other and others. I mean, this was executive education, so far easier to do. But I think this is a very good possibility. Again, all we need is remove our mental blocks from institutions and its administrators.
So Anil, I'll ask you a question about curriculum, and we're probably going slightly out of the main focus. Today, what happens in our departments is, if there is a course that I want to offer in which only 4 students are going to be there, it's very difficult for you to say, okay, you can offer this course because faculty is the most expensive resource. But suppose we have online education and I can offer this course, which will be taken by students around the world. Then it becomes very easy for me to offer even this unpopular elective. Somebody wants to go deep into this, not enough students in one campus. Wouldn't that be great that people can take, electives of their choice, which we are not able to offer today?
Yeah, Dheeraj, that will be wonderful if that happens, but it will not solve the issue inside the departments. Departments want the resource to be available to teach their own students. So they will say.
But I offer a course which is being registered from other IITs. Simply, I'm assuming that there is somebody in IIT Bombay offering a course which is unpopular on campus. and my students in Kanpur taking those courses.
Right.
Department should be able to live with that.
Yeah, sure. If we open up our minds, I think that is very natural. This is this liberalism should come. Somehow education should bring more liberalism, but we sometimes get very, very narrowed or chained down.
Okay, I see Pramath already coming back up here. Any last 30 seconds each? PJ, you go first.
I think online is a great medium, and like I said, just proved itself. It is opening of our, that is administrators and institutions' minds that is required. Otherwise, the access that it provides is unprecedented, especially for those who cannot get into this elite institution, which is 98% according to you. So what do they have to lose? Nothing.
Yeah, Ajit, your 30 seconds.
Yeah, so I would like to say that my worry is that post-COVID, we should not lose this momentum.
Exactly.
Got very good momentum. And now time has come to think, even if COVID lasts for 6 more months, 8 more months, how to sustain the momentum, that is an important thing to grapple now.
That the new normal should include online.
Right.
Yes. Thank you very much. My own take is I'm very excited about this online, and I think it is going to really spread the education far and wide to small towns, to villages, to people who cannot get any education today. And I'm sure India will be a different country in times to come. Thank you very much for being on this panel and for your remarks. Thanks.
Thanks, Dheeraj. Thanks, Pramath. Thanks, Ajit. Yes.
Thank Pramath.
I think it's great to see some friends together, and we could go on, but we'll spare the audience. Thank you so much all for joining. Ajit and PJ, great to see you. Thank you for conducting this. I hope to continue to do these kinds of sessions in the future and invite you. But thank you so much. Please stay for a very fascinating keynote that is coming up by Ben Nelson, who started this Minerva project, which is very, very futuristic. And Ben is already here. Ben, I'll take a minute to introduce you, and then I'll come back to you. But thank you all for joining this panel. We are moving to our next keynote, Reimagining the University. Ben Nelson is the CEO of the Minerva project, and I'm sure he's going to tell you more about it. Some of us know about this and have been tracking Minerva for several years now. Ben, I'm going to request Nikhil Gambhir, who's Director of Business and Innovation at Harappa Education, to do a proper introduction of you. And again, thank you very much for waking up early. I don't even know what time zone you're in, for waking up early and joining us. And we are really looking forward to this session. Since it's the last session of the day, we can take our time and have a nice conversation. Thank you again, and over to you, Nikhil.
Thank you so much, Pramath. Good evening, everyone. As someone who leads innovation at Harappa, I'm privileged and thrilled beyond words to introduce to you the man whose vision is to displace Harvard, Ben Nelson. Ben is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Minerva, possibly the most exciting example of transformation in the world of higher education. Minerva is a university program for the 21st century with a goal to provide a better than Ivy League education at an absurdly low cost. Ben is pressing the reset button on the college experience. In his tech-enabled curriculum, all incoming students are taught how to think and to use practical skills in the professional world, not just the classroom. Prior to Minerva, Ben spent more than 10 years at Snapfish, where he helped build the company from a startup to the world's largest personal publishing service. Ben is also the author of Building the Intentional University, a book I've had the privilege of reading, where he talks about his story and lays out a blueprint for how other universities can create their own Minervas. Ben, a very good morning, and thank you so much for waking up so early. I must say what a big fan I am of yours and of Minerva's Active Learning Forum, where no student is ever in the back row. Without further ado, over to you to help all of us understand how to think about reimagining the university as we navigate this pandemic.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. I really appreciate that, those very warm words and kind introduction. I wanted to just take a few minutes today to talk to you a little bit about a different vision of education and why I think it's important. It's no secret that everyone on this call, in fact, everyone around the world, knows what a higher education should be all about. You can go to any website of any university in the world, and you won't really see blaring on that front page that come to this university and you will learn chemistry, or you will learn history, or you will learn sociology, right? Those are all offerings of those institutions in which to major, but what you will really see are messages around learning how to think critically, learning how to solve complex problems, learning how to be a globally aware citizen, how to communicate effectively. We all know that higher education needs to provide these metacognitive skills, the ability for students to apply these thinking tools no matter what they pursue. But when we step back and look at the curriculum that is on offer, it is comprised of professors teaching courses within departmental subjects. Now, one could argue that indeed many of the courses in which those professors deliver their subject matter also provide tools for students to think more broadly or communicate effectively or solve big problems. And that may very well be true. But here is the fundamental problem that we face. We human beings have many design flaws, but one of them is that we have a very difficult time with a thing that psychologists refer to as far transfer. The ability to take a learning that is a generic learning, learned in a particular context or subject matter, and then transfer that to a different subject matter. There's a famous story that illustrates this, despite the fact that there are many studies that prove it, where a physics professor at Harvard University was teaching a course for non-physics majors. So for example, these would be an introductory course in physics for those who would go on to major in biology, right? That would need some physics as background. And he decided to make the course more relatable. And being in the United States, he decided to create a series of examples in the course about baseball. It's an American sport, but there's a lot of physics involved in baseball. Trajectories, parabolas, etc. Now, by the end of the semester, he ran out of baseball examples. So for the final exam, he used football. The students howled in protests. And many told him, no fair. You taught us a course about baseball, and now you're asking us about football. We can't do that. Now, you may look at this and say, well, that's absurd. These are Harvard students, right? These are bright, among the brightest students in the world. How is it that they don't see something that adjacent? That's not even far transfer, that's near transfer. But this isn't a damning of Harvard students. The reality is that subject matter grounded education does indeed make it difficult to abstract. So this is a dilemma. And in fact, one could wonder, well, what do we do about it? And really, what does this have to do? What does this curricular conversation have to do with a reimagined university, especially one that is so centered on a technologically mediated learning environment? Well, that is actually the crux of thinking about how to reinvent the university. When I was starting on my mission at Minerva to create a university that has wisdom at its center. Wisdom, by the way, is the colloquial term we all use to describe how to transfer ideas from one area to another. If you encounter a situation you've already encountered before and know what to do, that's just memory. But a wise person can encounter a new situation, a new culture, a new field of study, a new set of circumstances, and have an insight and understanding of how to apply lessons learned in other contexts to that context. And so this was my challenge. How do you actually create a learning environment that ties learning objectives taught in one field by one professor to a different field, perhaps taught by a different professor? How do you track the progress of students applying wisdom throughout their educational journey? And this was what we set out to build. We quickly realized that trying to do so in the traditional structure of universities, a set of professors teaching their expertise in an uncoordinated fashion, is not going to be possible to achieve this goal. First and foremost, you need an intellectual taxonomy that everybody will agree to. You can't identify transfer if one professor refers to a particular cognitive tool one way, whereas another professor refers to the same cognitive tool a different way. This is more common than you may think. For example, sometimes people will say, well, I want to diagnose what the problem is. And other people will refer to figuring out what the root cause is. Now, this seems very innocuous. It seems, oh, well, I guess if you diagnose an illness, for example, you want to get to the root cause of the illness. That makes sense. But if you aren't explicit about the language that is used in an educational environment for the student, it's very hard to make those connections themselves. Secondly, it's very difficult to deliver a structured education if you don't have data about student practices and applications from one field to another. How do you track not only depth of mastery of a particular tool, but also breadth of applications? Third, how do you create an environment in which students are not only deeply engaged in their learning, and where you can ensure that that is the case for every participant in a classroom environment, but also that they receive the kind of formative feedback that is necessary for them to learn from what they practice. You can have an extraordinarily well-structured curriculum. You can make sure students are deeply engaged, but if they aren't receiving the kind of feedback that helps them know whether or not they're on the right track in their educational path, then they're going to have a very hard time indeed attaining wisdom. And so with that in mind, we then thought about what kind of learning environment would be necessary to build to enable that kind of education. But we had one additional constraint that was crucial for us. Despite the fact that we were building a brand new university with no constraints, we wanted to make sure that whatever we built would be something that any university in the world would be able to implement. And this is the crux of why Minerva exists. We didn't build a new university in order to deliver a quality of education that the rest of the world doesn't see and then keep it to ourselves. And then say, you see, we're now the best university in the world. good luck. That's not the point of Minerva at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Minerva is a very small institution, but we want to have global impact and scale. And that means inspiring other institutions to also adapt these 3 principles in rethinking how it is that they deliver their education, not requiring them to throw out the infrastructure, brand, professoriate, student process, or even majors that they teach, but thinking more broadly about how they can adopt new approaches to education that will elevate what they do, that will make them better and better, not just at what they're already good at, but at things that have eluded the best of universities around the world for centuries. And that's how Minerva partners with existing institutions. It demonstrates not only the pathway, but provides the tools, the support in teacher training, in integration with the current curriculum into a new modality, and the infrastructure that is necessary to deliver this learning environment. Now, that does mean that for a portion of the courses a university teaches, they will be delivered in a medium like this, meaning a camera will be pointing at a student's face, camera will be pointing at a professor's face, and they engage in the setting of the taxonomy together. There is a common intellectual language that will be used throughout the curriculum, a set of skills that are taught to the student in an environment where you can be assured that the student both engages with the material, that the material will then be scaffolded and used throughout the curriculum, and where the students will get feedback on how it is they apply their learnings. But then you can continue to either produce the kinds of lessons and interactions you're used to in your university, but with this taxonomy in mind, or you could transform more and more of the curriculum and bring it into this virtual modality. In either case, the learning index follows the student, and professors can give students feedback on those same concepts, those same skills throughout their entire 4 years. The results are transformative. When you look at the outcomes of students in Minerva programs, and this is both for students within our own university, but also in places like India, where we work with a partner institution to think through how to transform general education, the outcomes for students are dramatic. Not only do we see dramatic gains in their own learning within these classes, we see improvements in learning across other courses. Not only do we see impact within their studies, but when it comes to summer internships, to job placements upon graduation, the kinds of opportunities that wise graduates have are unlike those graduates of any other institution in the world. And so my hope is that this is the beginning of a conversation, not a stochastic one. One where we can engage and think through how we work together to transform institutions in India and across the world. With that, I've gone a minute over my allotted time, and so I look forward to more questions and answers from the audience and deeper interactions.
Thanks so much, Ben. Some of the questions that are coming in, one of them is, could you deep dive a little more around learner engagement? One of the biggest challenges in online learning. So how does Minerva think about solving this challenge?
It's an excellent question. And this is actually one of the fascinating things about the whole conversation around quote unquote online learning. Think back 20 or 30 years ago. When you were discussing education at universities, have you ever referred to the idea of offline learning? Was that ever a modality that people discussed or thought about? I mean, clearly not. The concept is absurd, right? What does it mean to be doing offline learning? I mean, you could be sitting in a 300-person lecture hall. You can be sitting in a 20-person classroom. You could be around a 10-person round table in a deep seminar, or you could have a one-on-one tutorial. All of those things occur offline, right? But one has no relation to the other. The same thing is true when you talk about online education. It's not a thing, right? You could be logging onto a website and listening to a lecture. And guess what? You can pause, you can come back to it later. There's no time. And we all know that human behavior is such that when you have to engage in an asynchronous modality, it is hard, especially for younger learners, to have the discipline to make sure that they stick to time. That is a very hard modality of engagement. At the same time, it's also pretty hard to engage when you sit in a physical lecture hall. Brainwave patterns that have been studied of students listening to a lecture are identical to their brain activity when they're sleeping. And so the reality is that, and we know that sitting in lecture halls does not generate actual engagement. It doesn't generate lasting learning. And so instead, you have to actually go back to the roots of what it is that where students learn. And there are a number, more than a dozen of these techniques to help students understand and remember what it is that they learn. They fall into two broad categories. One category is that students have to have deep processing at all times. One of the reasons that lectures don't work is that a human, when receiving information, could be in a lecture, listening to a conversation like this, looking at television or movies, we believe we're in an information-rich environment. So we don't think deeply about what we're hearing. We're saying, oh my God, I'm learning so much. Look at all of this stuff that I am receiving. But we don't actually recall. The easy way of understanding this is that think about a movie or a television show that you just saw 2 days ago, 3 days ago for the first time, not one that you've seen over and over and over again, but for the first time. Go back, sit down, and sketch, just write out the outline of what occurred. Go from scene 1 to scene 2 to scene 3 to scene 4. Just go through the entire sequence. Now go back and rewatch and tell me how close your recalled sequence was to the events of the actual show. Now, these shows are highly engaging, right? They spend millions of dollars to entertain. But the reality is that even those types of highly produced environments aren't that effective at learning. Instead, what you have to do is make sure that the students are engaged at all times. And an online environment can help you do that if it is built for purpose. If it is built as a web conferencing tool, it doesn't do that at all. Right? And so while Zoom may be a great environment to have a conference, certainly to have a one-on-one meeting, have a conversation, it's a terrible learning environment because there's no concept of deep engagement. The second is the use and making of associations. And this is related to transfer, but it cements your ability to recall and understand the kinds of learnings that you get in a classroom. And that is fundamentally a curricular and pedagogical approach. In fact, both are. But in both cases, we build those types of techniques into our technology learning environment. And this is why Forum, our learning environment, is so powerful and why it works for universities across the world.
Great. Thank you so much for that. We have another question that's come in. How do you work with the existing systems of accreditation? Is the Minerva approach recognized by them?
Yes, that's an extraordinarily important constraint that we put upon ourselves when we started. So first and foremost, we launched in an accredited university, within an accredited university here in the United States. And we had to get 8 separate approvals to accredit not only the Minerva approach, but every specific instantiation of it, right, across a variety of fields like computational science, natural science, arts and humanities, business, social sciences, graduate education, etc. And so we went through the hard work to ensure that what we do complies with the gold standard of accreditation. And then we implemented the kinds of offerings that we have in various parts around the world, including in India. Now, in some countries, the accreditation is more difficult than others. India happens to be an environment where accreditation is quite stringent. But even within that environment, there are ways to modularize our approach and fit it within the curricular requirements of a particular country. Now, that may mean that a university isn't able to spend an entire year on delivering the taxonomy for its students. Perhaps it is able to do that 40% in the first year and 40% in the second year. That's fine, it's sufficient. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but the key is to work together with our institutional partners that understand their accreditation environment, and then collaborate on building a new kind of educational approach in order to fit both within the accreditation and regulatory environment, as well as to optimize for student learning.
Great, thanks. Another question. Can you talk a little bit more about how this format allows for more interaction between different disciplines and some examples of the same?
Absolutely. I mentioned this concept of diagnosis and root problem, but let me delve a little bit deeper into that so that you can understand perhaps what our approach is. So we all know, just as being adults and human beings who've lived life, that if we fall ill, if we don't feel well, that we want to diagnose what our illness is before we treat it, right? If we just were to not feel well and just do random things, we could kill ourselves, right? Doctors, of course, know this, right? That you need to diagnose an illness before prescribing medication. Very simple, right? Now imagine that same doctor going home after a long day and getting into an argument with her spouse. Why didn't you take out the garbage? Simple argument. Well, they go back and forth, maybe they bicker a little bit. How many doctors would say, wait a second, why are we fighting about the garbage? Let's pause and understand what is the root cause of the friction in our relationship that's generating this argument? Well, almost none. Now that's very strange, because every day the doctor asks dozens of times root cause questions. What is it that is underlying the symptom that is generating, that is manifesting in the illness? Here, they're trying to solve a problem. They're not arguing for the sake of arguing. They're trying to find a solution. Yet they're not addressing the cause of the problem. they don't even think to look at the root cause. Similarly, when you talk to a doctor about public policy, what party they support, what legislation they support, rarely do doctors think about root cause versus symptom mitigation. And that is an example of transfer. Now, an easy way of addressing this is you find a common taxonomy. For example, you teach students, not in medical school, right, or even before medical school, not that you're diagnosing an illness, but that you're looking for the right problem to address. In illness, you do that in diagnosing, right, in illness, in medicine. In public policy, you think about root cause of problems as opposed to addressing symptoms. In interpersonal relationships, you look at the dynamics between individuals and what causes friction or disagreement. But it's the same approach and the same idea. And so the way you bring together different disciplines isn't just by having one professor teach half of a course, another professor teach another half of a course. It is to actually refer back to the same mental frameworks and allow students the ability to transfer their learning from one context to another.
Great, thank you. So as part of your model, you've got the first year in San Francisco, the next 3 years in 6 different countries. What's the experience been like? What's your favorite country in terms of the experience, and how does the city as a campus really work within the model?
It's a great question. So maybe first a little bit about why we do what we do. So the concept of transfer, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, isn't just transferring of a particular skill from one subject matter to another. That's a very important component, but there are other components as well. Culture is one of them. Let's think about right problem. Our students start their education in San Francisco. And when you address the concept of right problem, what is the problem that you need before you start to solve it, in an environment that is only thinking about startups, right? Because San Francisco is kind of a startup town, and that's the orientation, right? And San Francisco itself is also an environment, Silicon Valley is an environment that is highly international, right? And so you don't really have a dominant ethnic culture here. You have a dominant business culture, right? That people adapt to. And that kind of Silicon Valley mentality is very open to the idea of right problem, right? You go and address and say, hey, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? What do your startup do? What's the elevator pitch, right? And people have that kind of mentality. So that's a very interesting environment to learn or to ground yourself in right problem. But then in their next semester, they go to Seoul in South Korea. And even though Seoul's got many startups, it is not dominated by startup culture. It is Korean culture. And in Korean culture, when you try to get into the right problem, you have to also think about who you're interacting with and the hierarchical structure in the organization in which you interact, which may actually change the nature of how you pursue and get to the application of right problem. The next semester, they spend a semester in Hyderabad, in India. And that culture, I don't need to tell you about, but think about what it takes in an Indian context to understand root cause and to uncover and unpack, right? Based on dialogue, conversation, cultural norms, right? How you pursue that concept. And so the reason that we get our students to go through a very difficult experience and go from culture to culture, country to country, is because we want to provide to them a stark difference in the way that they approach the world. And in fact, those first 3 cities that I mentioned, San Francisco, Seoul, and Hyderabad, to me, is the best sequence in which you can start someone in a journey to understand culture around the world, right? And so for me, I think it's less about what is my favorite of the cities, because I love all of these cities. I wouldn't have picked to go to them if I didn't to begin with, but it really is more about the contrast between them, which, by the way, is also crucial in the educational mold. If you want to make sure that students learn transfer, you must provide them some subject matter that is not in their major area of study. They have to be able to not only have the taxonomy, right, that can traverse fields, but to actually be able to practice it in a variety of fields.
Thank you. We've got one more question, something around examinations online. And how does Minerva think about ensuring academic integrity with examinations going online?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I will say, on one hand, we don't, because we don't do exams. But on the other hand, and the reality is that in many ways, every single class is an exam. The students get assessed on what they do in class. Now, they also get project work, which is basically the same thing as you do offline. A student writes a paper, they submit it, you grade it, right? So any project-based or paper-based course, online, offline, doesn't matter. You don't know what the student is doing, right? You have to have, of course, codes of conduct. You look for plagiarism, right? There are tools that you can use for that. You look at patterns. But more importantly, in the Minerva model, because you assess what students are saying in class, you can actually see some stark contrasts, right? So for example, if a student has a brilliant application of right problem, just keep harping on that because that's one of the 80 things that we teach our students in their first year, but we talked about it. So let's say that, they write a project where it's a wonderful example of right problem, they understand it, they get it clearly, etc. Yet in classes before and after the submission of this paper, it is very clear they don't understand the concept at all. Well, that could mean that there has been some cheating, right? And so you have that kind of interaction. But we've built polls, free-form answers, debates, simulations into our learning environment. And so, for example, at the beginning of every single class, the students are asked to synthesize their pre-class work, and they're asked a question that they could not answer unless they both did the reading and understood it themselves. So it's not a factual-based question, not what's on page 3, paragraph 4. It is, how do you integrate what you have learned? And that poll answer, free form, is graded, right? At the end of every class, they're asked a synthesis question, right? And that synthesis question is graded, right? And so if you want to create an entire set of these questions in an online proctored environment, well, guess what? There's a camera pointing directly at the student's face. You can see what they're doing. You can even have them share their desktop, right? If you really want to proctor it. But the point is that a proctoring of exams is really about the kinds of questions that you ask rather than, the modality in which you ask them.
Great. So you're saying in some ways we can proctor you right now while we're having this conversation.
Exactly. Certainly, if you were to use Forum, you could.
Great. So just we have a last question for the day. One of your goals is in some ways to be better than the Ivy League institutions in terms of the experience. How do you envisage the role of faculty, and how do you manage costs for a model like this?
Well, see, that's really the beauty of the particular instantiation of what we do. And so if you think about the cost structure of the institution, there are several levers to pull, right? One lever is the efficiency of the faculty. How many students does one faculty member teach? And one of the advantages of Forum is that you can dial that up quite a bit while still engaging students completely, meaning ensuring that 100% of the students in the class are doing deep processing and making associations the vast majority of the time. So we can create fully active learning environments for well over 100 students at a time, which means that faculty efficiency goes up dramatically. Now, you still need to give assessments for those students. And so that means that if you have large class environments, you have teaching assistants to help do some of the grading, much like you would do in normal large classes. But of course, having scaled teaching assistants is much cheaper than scaling the faculty. But that's not the lever that we pull within our own university, even though we've done that with our partners to great effect. At our own university, we pull a different lever, which is that we take out the fixed costs of the campus. Because we deliver 100% of our education virtually, we don't need the campus-based environment, right? Because we don't need classrooms. Students can take their classes from anywhere. Now, we have particularly high bandwidth in the residence halls in which our students live, right? And so many of our students take their classes from their residence halls. And in an environment like India, you may want to actually have students congregate in one place where they have access to very high bandwidth opportunities. But it means that the buildings that you have on campus already could be used in a much more efficient way. So imagine, for example, if a quarter of your curriculum were to be delivered in an online modality with extraordinarily high efficiency on your professors. Well, you could increase your student body by 33% without adding barely any physical infrastructure whatsoever. That can be transformative for the efficiency of an institution, right? And so that's a big part of what it is that we're doing. Of course, for universities that are being built, right? Because India is generating new universities all the time. Imagine if you could build out a new campus environment with 70% fewer buildings, but serving the same number of students. Think about the transformative effect that will have on the financials of the institution. Right? And so these are all of the types of things that we can work with institutions collaboratively to figure out.
Okay, I see Pramath is nudging me to close. Thank you so much, Ben. Really, thank you so much for taking out the time and waking up so early to do this for us. I think a big takeaway for me is to improve my wisdom quotient with the far learning concept, and hope to see you at some point physically in India, whenever that is. Thank you, and have a good day. Over to you, Pramath.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ben. Ashish joins me in thanking you for making the time. It was fascinating. I was hanging on to every word, and even though we've gone over by about 15 minutes, I let it go on because there was so much to learn. And in fact, I was watching the participants and there was zero attrition. They were all there throughout. So thank you very much for making the time. And thank you, Nikhil, for moderating. We'll catch up with you sometime, Ben. Fascinating what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
We'll close with that for the day, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you will join us tomorrow. It's been a fascinating 2 days. And we have our third and final day tomorrow, leading off with a keynote speech by Professor D.P. Singh, the chairman of the University Grants Commission. We also have Professor Rick Levin, who was the president of Yale University and the former CEO of Coursera. And I'm very excited to be hosting the final valedictory keynote by Dr. Debbie Prentice, who's the provost at Princeton University, who will be talking about her experiences in dealing with the crisis. I hope you will join us again tomorrow, 4 p.m. Same format, 3 keynotes and 3 panel discussions across the 3 tracks. I definitely want to thank all of you for joining and supporting us, and please show up tomorrow and please encourage others to join us. And particularly want to thank our partners, the Association of Indian Universities, Careers 360, College Dunia, Digital Learning, EdTech Review, the Education Promotion Society of India, Harvard Business Publishing, and the Harvard Business School India Research Center. Good night, stay safe and stay well, and see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock.